All right, well, good morning, everyone. Again, welcome to our quarterly new business workshop with the Tennessee Department of Revenue. I'm Katie Julian with Taxpayer Services Division. And on behalf of our Commissioner, David Geragano, and our Director of Taxpayer Services, Elena Turner, I would like to welcome you and thank you for being here. We really appreciate you participating in this. Whether you're a new business owner, or you're planning to start a new business, maybe you're an established new business, or someone who helps new businesses. We're just happy to have you here because the more we all know, the better, right? I'm joined here today by our Assistant Director, Dan Vinson, Manager of our call center, Mitch Gibson, and a supervisor out of our East Tennessee office, Lance Estes. Thanks to you guys for joining us. We are going to be presenting this a presentation to you today, and I've got a link in the chat to a participant guide or PDF of this, but we're going to stop periodically throughout to have Q&A sessions. We'll open up the chat at that time, and Lance, Dan, well, actually, I think Dan has to hop out here in a little while, but Lance and Mitch and I will answer your questions that come into the chat at that point. So if you've got questions as we move along through the presentation, just kind of jot them down and then pop them in the chat when we open up the chat during our Q&A breaks. A few things here. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't hear me, you can't hear me, right? But we've got information on the slide that you're looking at right now. If you do have audio difficulties or something comes up, you can get out of the event and then rejoin it. You're able to do that. That's what we have found, honestly, is kind of the quickest way if there's issues, if you've already tested your audio and all that stuff. I'll let you know about the PDF being in the chat, and you can link over to it and find it by the going to our website, tn.gov/revenue, clicking on taxpayer education and then new business workshops. It's going to be a long morning here, 3 hours long. It's a lot of information we have to present to you. We've condensed it even, so I think this workshop could be a day-long workshop if we really wanted to cover everything. But we'll have a couple of breaks, as I mentioned, so you know too, if you do have to leave or you want to refer back to this recording at a later point, we will post a recording of today's presentation on that new business workshops page on our website. So without further ado, I'm going to go through here to the workshop overview. We are going to be going through first steps to setting up your business. As I mentioned, we've got a poll in here right now. It looks like we've got about a small percentage have not even started a business yet. About 5% of you have not started yet. So good luck. Congratulations on making that choice or thinking about making the choice to start a business. We've got about 42%. The majority of people in here right now have started a new business within the last year. So some of these steps of getting started, you might think, well, I've already done that. I've already chosen my business name. I've already done this, that. Well, something might stand out to you as we're going through these slides about starting your business that you realize, hey, I wasn't consistent here or there in this one particular area, or maybe I did this wrong. It's not too late, and we'll impress that upon you as we move along. If there's anything that we are talking about that you realize, hey, I think I might have done that wrong, reach out to us. We can fix it. Better to fix it now than on the back end when you realize, ooh, somehow I've got 2 business tax accounts or something like that. Those things happen when you're getting started. This is kind of confusing stuff. We'll try to take as much guesswork out of it. But back to the poll here, we've got about 14% have an established business. And about 7% of you in here right now help businesses. So thanks to you all for partnering with us to do that. After we go through steps to setting up your business, we'll have a quick little 5-minute or so break, and then we'll come back for some Q&A. We'll answer your questions regarding setting up your business. Then we will move along to talking about the tax accounts, which is a part of setting up your business, but we'll dive a little bit deeper into the basic and more common tax accounts and let you know of some resources that can help you further there. We'll have another break then, and then we'll come back to share resources, which is my favorite part. We have some great resources. They get better and better every day, and we really like to brag on them and show you where they are because we use them as employees of Department of Revenue and Taxpayer Services. I don't know about you guys, Mitch, Lance, Dan, but I have to use our manuals and our help section and our tax pages on the website daily, all day long. I refer back to those resources. So Real quick here, just before we get started on getting set up, I like sharing this slide with you just so you know, here in Tennessee, we are very fiscally sound. If you live in Tennessee, which I think the majority of the people registered for today do, you know, we don't have an income tax, right? That's wonderful. But somehow we managed to be number 3 in the country for fiscal stability, which we should all be proud of. And as a business owner or someone planning to start a business, a lot of the revenue that comes into this state that the whole state operates on is done by you as a business. You are paying business taxes, you're collecting sales tax from your customers and then remitting it over. It's a very important role that you as a business owner have in making this state run. So we really appreciate that. And again, our goal is to make your life as easy as possible when it comes to all this tax stuff, right? Because you want to be having fun running your business and not worrying about all this. And it can be burdensome if you don't understand all the ins and outs of it. So hopefully we'll take some of that guesswork out. All right, Mitch, I'll hand things over to you to talk about these first few steps with starting new businesses on our website.
Yeah, so this is actually it's a new resource that we've recently added to our website. It's specific to new businesses. If you notice, we've got it broken down into 6 different steps, and we're going to break down each of those steps as we progress through the presentation. One thing that's really helpful is we have a checklist. If you notice, it's on that link there. Just click on that link, and that will provide you with a checklist that you can sort of follow along with us. What we'll do is we'll break down each step and kind of give you some guidance on how to progress with starting your new business in Tennessee.
Mitch, let me interrupt you for 1 second. Yeah. They may have already realized if they tried, you can't click on the link directly from this WebEx from the inside of the webinar, but if you have the PDF that we linked you over to, all of the hyperlinks in the PDF are live. So can't click on it from your screen here, but thought I'd mention that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Katie. Well, we'll go ahead and progress with the first step. Step 1 is setting up a business. And so there's a couple of really important features in setting up a business. What we're going to do is we're going to break down each of these points in a little more detail as we progress through the presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of read through some of these, but again, we'll go into more detail on each of them as we progress. It's really, really important to know that you need to make sure that you determine all of these factors before registering for any accounts or licenses in the state of Tennessee. It's really important to sort of build the foundation of your business prior to just willy-nilly applying for tax accounts. We have a lot of taxpayers that sort of put the cart before the horse, and that can kind of get them into some trouble later on down the road. And so some of the things that you can do when you first start your business is determining what the business structure is going to be or what the entity type is going to be. Are you going to be a sole proprietorship? Are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to be a corporation? Again, we'll break those down a little bit later, but you need to determine what your entity structure is going to be. Business name, business addresses, that's pretty straightforward. Do you need to register with the Tennessee Secretary of State? We're going to break down what that means, what that entails, what some of those requirements are, and how that impacts the Tennessee Department of Revenue. Do you need an EIN number? So a lot of taxpayers actually do not know what an EIN number is. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break down what that number is, where you get it, your start date of the business. We're going to talk about establishing your start date of the business. Need to determine what your NAICS code is. So we get a lot of confusion pertaining to the NAICS code. The NAICS code is essentially just a code that defines the primary business activity for the business. So it's important to know what that is. What is your fiscal tax year? We'll break that down and talk a little bit about that. And then also directors, officers, and shareholders, you'll want to determine what those are as well before starting your business. And so it's really important that you break all of those items down before registering any tax accounts or licenses. The slide that you're currently looking at, that first point, establishing the structure type. Now, we can give some general guidance or general definitions of what each of these structure types are. Typically, what we do is if you have any questions as to what you should structure your business as, we're not really in a place to tell you how to structure your business. So we would recommend that you reach out to an accountant or a CPA or maybe even an attorney to determine what best suits you. However, this is just some general guidance as to what each entity type, entity structure entails. So essentially, anyone who registers a business in Tennessee, they must ensure they indicate their business structure. Okay, this is necessary to establish tax accounts. One of the more common entity structures that we have, or I guess business structure, would be a sole proprietorship. Okay, so these businesses are set up under one individual, and the entity ID that all tax accounts would be registered under would be that individual social security number. Okay. Moving on, we've got partnerships or general partnerships. This is generally 2 or more persons that sort of run the business. This would actually be set up under an FEIN. And again, we'll break down what the EIN number is a little later, but they would not be registered under any one social security number. That entity structure would be registered under that EIN number. LLCs. So there's 2 different types of LLCs. There's a single member LLC. This is an LLC that's set up under one individual. This one is it's treated a little differently. So from a federal standpoint, the federal government does not require a single member LLC to have a federal employee identification number, an FEIN. And so these can be set up under social security numbers. However, if you're a multi-member LLC, these are always set up under FEINs. And so if you decide to be a multi-member LLC, then you'll want to be set up under that federal employee identification number. If you're a professional limited liability company, these are companies that are engaged in rendering certain professional services, and those would also be registered under an FEIN. Corporations, same situation, they would be registered under an FEIN as well, and then so would nonprofits. And nonprofits are granted tax exempt status by the IRS specifically. And so that's a little bit of information about entity structures and the different types of entity structures that we have registering within the state of Tennessee. Katie, did you want to add any points to that?
Yeah, just one thing, and I think we see this quite often where if you're a sole proprietorship, you may have an FEIN. If you have employees, you're going to be required to have that FEIN. And when you go to get yourself set up with the Department of Revenue, or maybe you start at your local clerk's office to get a license, make sure if you're a sole prop, if you haven't gotten set up yet, or even if you have already set yourself up and accidentally used that EIN with your clerk or with the Tennessee Department of Revenue, that's one of those situations where you would just reach out to us and we can fix that. Your tax account has to be registered under that social, but we do see it. It's not uncommon at all that we see, because both are 9 digits long, right? The social and the EIN are 9 digits long. It's one of those things that we have to fix pretty regularly, I would say. Wouldn't you, Lance and Mitch, that's one of those issues where they've got that EIN, so they use it, but it's not what we need.
Correct. Yep, absolutely.
All right, well, let's move along here to name and address.
Yeah, so establishing a name is obviously very important. We have a really helpful resource. As Katie said earlier, you can't click on the link right now. However, when you look at these slides later on, you can click on that link to visit the Small Business Association website. They've got some helpful tips on how to select your business name. If you find out that you're an entity that needs to register through the Secretary of State, the Secretary of State also has an availability database. That's a helpful resource because you can search to see if that business name is already in use by a business that's chartered in the state. And so it's really important to use those tools in determining what your business name is going to be. Business addresses, we get a lot of questions pertaining to addresses specifically. We've actually got a couple of different types of addresses that we use within our system. The 2 that are listed, the first one is location addresses. So this is essentially any address where you have a physical presence. So think brick and mortar, they have a physical location address. And so however, if your business is online, which we do have a lot of taxpayers who have an online business, typically we recommend that location address be the physical place wherever records are maintained or where the business is mostly operated from. That would probably be the physical location address for that business. Of course, we have a mailing address. Mailing address is pretty straightforward. This is just where you want to receive the mail that the Tennessee Department of Revenue sends to you. We always ask taxpayers to update their mailing address and make sure that that information is accurate, because we send out a lot of important information to taxpayers on various topics, not only pertaining to your individual tax accounts, but also pertaining to tax laws, filing requirements, due dates, things like that. And so it's really important to make sure that your mailing address is always up to date. There's another address that isn't necessarily listed here, but I'll kind of cover it. It's we call it the primary address. And so primary addresses, they a lot of times they're the same as the location address. It really just depends. But you'll see a lot of LLCs. Maybe they have a primary address. That's where the LLC is based. But then they have maybe a couple of DBAs under that LLC where they'll have different location addresses. And so all of these addresses serve a purpose. And we want taxpayers to understand the importance of keeping these addresses up to date at all times. It's also really important to understand that a business location address cannot be a post office box. Okay, so our system will not allow for a PO box to be entered in as a location address, simply because this is not where records can be maintained. This is not where a business can be managed or operated, and so our system will not allow for a PO box to be a location address.
Mitch, just one thing I want to add before we move on to the next slide up with regarding establishing a business name. I want to just advise people, if you are going to say in your business name that you are an LLC or an Inc., if you're a corporation, because that sounds nice, right? You think, oh, whatever, LLC or Inc. Just know that even if you have not yet registered with the Secretary of State, we'll get to this later when we talk about tax accounts, but corporations and LLCs are required to register for and file for franchise and excise tax. So if you're stating in your name that that is what you are and that's what then you're going to need to register for F&E tax. So just be careful about putting that in the name if it's not indeed what you are, because we see that happen sometimes where they're like, well, I'm not, I never, it's LLC is in my name, but I never registered with Secretary of State. Well, then you need to drop that LLC, because if you're saying you're an LLC, then you are, as far as the law is concerned, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, let's move along here. All right.
Yeah. So Secretary of State, this is a really important aspect for business in the state of Tennessee. And so Tennessee Secretary of State is where any corporation, partnership, limited liability company, or business trust chartered or organized in the state or doing business in the state, they're going to register with the Tennessee Secretary of State. And when you register with the Tennessee Secretary of State, you are now responsible for filing an annual report through the Tennessee Secretary of State. And so again, going back to the entity structure. So after you have determined what your entity structure is, if you've decided to be an LLC or a corporation, then you're gonna have to register with the Tennessee Secretary of State and file that annual report with them. Again, as we mentioned earlier, we get a lot of questions about EIN numbers. We actually get a lot of taxpayers who think that we issue the federal employee identification numbers, but we do not. The Tennessee Department of Revenue, we are just for the state of Tennessee, whereas the EIN number is a federal ID number for federal tax purposes. And so you would actually get that number from the IRS, okay? And that number is used for setting up all tax accounts except for sole proprietorships. And again, as I mentioned earlier, single member LLCs are not required to have an EIN from a federal standpoint. Therefore, we can't require you to have an EIN either. We would probably, prefer you to have an EIN because it's a little easier during the registration process. However, we can work with you in helping you get your tax account set up correctly and all of that. Most entities with employees are required to have an EIN. Even through sole proprietorships and single member LLCs register with us using their social security numbers. So what Katie was saying earlier, even if you're a sole proprietorship, you may need to have an EIN for another purpose. I've had some taxpayers where banks may require them to have an EIN number to open up a business tax account, a business banking account. So it really just depends on what the business needs. Katie, did you want to add anything to? Okay.
I don't think so, not at this point.
Okay. So determining your start date. This is actually a really important aspect before applying for any tax accounts within the state of Tennessee. Essentially, just to keep it simple, the start date, it's going to be the effective business start date. It's the date that tax obligations begin in the state of Tennessee. Okay. So if you've chartered with the Secretary of State prior to registering with the Tennessee Department of Revenue, you'll use the effective date of your charter. Okay. So when you register with Secretary of State, the charter date, it's also known as the form date. Okay. So if I was to go to the Secretary, if I decided I wanted to register my LLC, today is April 5th, 2023. My form date is going to be April 5th, 2023. And ideally, that's the date that you would want to use when registering and applying for any tax accounts in the state of Tennessee. One really important aspect in understanding this pertains specifically to sales tax. So if a sales tax account is set up before the business opens, we have a lot of taxpayers that don't realize that they're required to file based on that start date. Okay, so let's say my form date of that LLC that I just stated in that example, my form date is April 5th, 2023, and I apply for a sales tax account with that same start date. But let's say I don't have my first sale until June. Okay, I don't collect any sales tax until June 2023. I still have to file that April return and that May return. I would just file a $0 return. Okay. And so when you establish that start date and you apply for all of the different tax accounts that you're required to file, it's really important to understand that that start date means that's when the tax obligation begins. Okay. And if you have any questions pertaining to that, then we've got a lot of really helpful resources on our website.
And that's real common, Mitch, especially with sales tax accounts, because if you're going to be selling tangible personal product, you're going to need to stock up with inventory, right? So,
Correct.
and we'll talk about this here in a little while when we talk about tax accounts, but that resale certificate, so you can go buy product without paying tax for it because you're going to resell it. You'll need that certificate, which means you'll need to start that sales tax account. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but that's why that is so common, because you need that resale certificate. You need to start that sales tax account. Just as soon as you start that sales tax account, put a little reminder on your phone. After a period of time, it'll become second nature, but you're going to have a tax return for sales tax due the very next month. And if you don't have sales yet, just like Mitch said, it takes you about 4 seconds to file that return. The very first question says, do you have sales to report? You say, no, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Submit.
It's very easy to file a $0 return, which we'll dive into sales tax a little later in this presentation. But yeah, if you do, start that sales tax account and you don't file those returns, then our collections division will start sending you some nasty letters that aren't super friendly, and we don't want you to receive those, unnecessarily. So we want to make sure that the taxpayers are as educated as much at the onset of their business rather than after. So.
And if you're someone who, like Mitch just said, if you didn't realize or you have forgotten because you're not in the groove yet, and you've had some of those assessments build up on you, we can help you with that. Whether you've gotten one of those letters or noticed that you have one of those letters, at some point it will have to get dealt with, though. You can go back in retroactively. Let's say you got your sales tax account 6 months ago and you've been buying inventory and you're not really starting it, and you have been forgetting or not realizing that you needed to file. It's going to look like if you log into TINTAP and have access to that account, you're going to see a kind of hefty amount because we put these assessments on there. That's not what you owe. Not going to get too deep into that right now, but we can fix it. You can go back and retroactively file 0 returns, starting with back when you started. Just go in one at a time and do that. So for you new businesses that have been established for about a year or so, which I think the majority of the people in this webinar are in that boat, that may have happened to you. It's pretty common for that to happen. We'll help you get it fixed if that's the case. So
definitely. Yeah. Moving on. NAICS code. So as I mentioned earlier, the NAICS code, NAICS stands for North American Industry Classification System Code. It's essentially just a code that defines the primary business activity of the business. And so again, we have a link there that can help you navigate to try to determine what your NAICS code is. Now, we have a lot of businesses that may have multiple different types of business activity that they're engaged in. Maybe they have 2 or 3 different types of business activity. What we typically recommend is that taxpayer would determine which activity generates the majority of the sales for the business. That would probably be the NAICS code that you would want to assign yourself. So that's a very helpful code. And again, that code it's used for collecting, analyzing, and publishing statistical data. And so, but whenever you register for tax accounts in the state of Tennessee, it's going to ask you to establish that NAICS code. So just be aware of that. Fiscal tax year. We get a lot of questions in the General Call Center pertaining to this. The overwhelming majority of our taxpayers have a December fiscal year end. And basically what this means is they operate on a calendar year filing frequency. So essentially they file 12 consecutive months beginning January 1 and ending December 31st. However, we do have some taxpayers that have a different fiscal year end apart from December. And so that essentially would be the same concept. It would be a 12 consecutive months ending on the last day of any month except for December. And so we do have a couple that I've seen recently that may have an April fiscal year end. Regardless, what we really sort of ask taxpayers to do is after you've determined your fiscal year end, try to maintain that consistency across all tax accounts that you register for. There's nothing more confusing than having one tax account with one fiscal year end and then another tax account with a completely different one. And so there should be some rhyme and reason to how a lot of these tax accounts are structured. And one thing that we really, really try to push taxpayers to do is have that same fiscal year end across all tax types. And so we'll dive into that a little bit later when we break down each of the different tax types. And then, of course, identifying the directors, officers, and shareholders. It's pretty straightforward. Who owns the business, who's running the business, who's operating the business. We want to have record of who those individuals are whenever those businesses are getting registered in the state. And so.
And that's something that you can update us on, right, Mitch? If those,
yes.
It doesn't change the, you don't have to get a new tax account every time there's a addition or a deletion of a shareholder. Just keep us posted of that. Send us written documentation.
Yes. That's a very important point. I'm glad that you mentioned that. We do get a lot of questions about, hey, we have one shareholder that's no longer with us, or we've replaced them, or they've sold their rights to the business. How do we handle that? Just give us a call and we can make sure that registration gets corrected. And there's some documentation that we may require or ask of you just to verify that information is correct. But that's easy to fix. That's no problem.
Is that something, I should know this, but is that something that you can do on TINTAP? I don't know off the top of my head if that's one of those things.
I don't believe it is.
So,
I think that they would have to contact us directly.
So. That's what I thought. Okay. Great. Well, I'm going to take over here for a minute and talk about licensing, permits, and more. Oh, I added an exclamation point, like that's exciting there. But this is part of what I think is one of the most confusing aspects of setting up your business. I've had a small business before, lots of friends. I think if you've ever participated in being a business owner, you've thought, where do I go for what? It's so confusing, especially within government. We, unfortunately, but it's just the nature of the beast, we kind of operate in silos, right? You have got to go to this agency for this particular license or whatever it is, and register over here, register over there, and the next thing you know, you get a letter in the mail saying you didn't register here or there. Well, hopefully this slide can take a little bit of that guesswork out of things for you. We'll start at the top here, your business license. We'll talk more about business licensing when we talk about business tax, because those two are very closely tied in together. But for your business license, which most businesses in Tennessee are going to need a business license, there are a few exceptions to that, but you go to your city and or county clerk's office. Every business in Tennessee is located in a county that requires a business license, because all 95 counties require you to have a business license. There are some stipulations there that we'll detail in a minute, but you may or may not be located wherever your business is, may or may not be located in a city or municipality, as we call it, that requires business licensing. You may be in an unincorporated part of the county. We do have a resource on our website where you can see which municipalities, which cities require business license, but that is obtained at your city and or municipality office. As Mitch mentioned earlier, to register your business or obtain a Tennessee charter, you go to the Tennessee Secretary of State's office. We work real closely with both the clerks, city and county clerks, and the Tennessee Secretary of State. In different ways, we share a lot of data. If you go to the Tennessee Secretary of State and you register there, but you have not yet come to us, we get information from the Secretary of State that a business has chartered, and then you might get a letter from us saying, hey, we see that you registered with the Secretary of State, but we don't yet have you on our rolls. Reach out to us. We need to get you registered with us too. That Secretary of State is not required for sole proprietorships. You don't have to register your business with the Secretary of State if you're a sole prop, but if you're a partnership, corporation, LLC, a business trust, you will be required to register with the Secretary of State. As Mitch mentioned earlier, your EIN, your Federal Employee Identification Number, is obtained by the IRS. It is required for certain business types and any business that has employees, regardless of structure. And again, I'm going to repeat here, if you are a sole proprietorship and you have an EIN, you will still register with the Tennessee Department of Revenue and at your county clerk's office for that business license using a Social Security number, not the EIN. Unemployment insurance. So there's a tax that's due for that if you do have employees, a payroll tax. There's confusion here because some people reach out to us. All tax accounts in Tennessee are run through the Tennessee Department of Revenue, except for payroll tax. That is handled through the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development. If you have employees, reach out to them. I don't know actually a whole lot about that, about unemployment insurance and payroll tax. I just know that it's something that's handled by Department of Labor and Workforce. So you'll need to reach out to them. Now, I know they've got great resources on their website. If you do have employees or plan on having employees, you need to research that resource there. There are some professions that do require a license. This is different than your business license. If you're a cosmetologist, if you are a contractor, an insurance agent, lots of different professions in Tennessee require a license. You obtain that from the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance. There are a handful, just a very small, I think at this point we're down to, I think, 4 or 5 professions where there is a tax that you're going to owe. We're not going to talk about that today because I don't think we have a lot of those. It's called the professional privilege tax, but there's information on our website about that. But if you are a professional, you may want to check with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance to see if you need a license for your profession. You probably would already know if you're a doctor, a lawyer, nurse, those kind of go without saying, but there are some other professions that require, I think, exterminators, all kinds of professions that require a professional license. You obtain that through the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance. And again, that's different than your business license. Again, we're throwing lots of terms out here. I was at a clerk's office pretty recently, and there was a contractor that was in there saying, I'm so confused. I have my contractor's license. It's right here. Here's my contractor's license. Why are you telling me I need a license? I need a license. And the clerk, he needed to obtain a business license as well. The business license and the professional license, those are different things. If you are going to be serving or selling alcohol, you will need to reach out to the Alcoholic Beverage Commission, the TABC. For any sales of alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises, you'll need a license there. There's a tax account associated with that too, a liquor by the drink tax account. There's several alcohol taxes that we have. We won't be talking about those a lot today, but we do not handle the licensing for that. You'd have to reach out to the TABC for that. And finally, tax accounts, that's us. We are the Tennessee Department of Revenue here. Most businesses, with very few exceptions, are going to have a tax account. If you are a business in Tennessee, or you're a business that is not located in Tennessee, but that has connection to Tennessee, we'll talk a little bit about that, then most likely you're going to have at least one tax account with us. And we'll dive into that here in just a little while, a little bit deeper.
Katie, if I can just mention one thing on that last slide.
Sure.
Going back to step 1 in establishing your business name, addresses, structure type, entity ID, all that stuff, it's really important that when you register for licenses, chartering through the Secretary of State, that you are consistent with all of that information clear across the board. Okay, so when you choose your business structure, when you choose your entity ID, when you choose all of the name, the address, that you use that same information clear across the board. You'd be surprised how many taxpayers that we get where they'll apply with one government agency with some information, and they'll apply with another government agency with completely different information. And that's when duplicate accounts can get created, and that can kind of cause a bit of a mess. And so whenever you're establishing that business, try to stay consistent with how you are registering all of these different licenses and permits. It just makes things a lot easier on the Department of Revenue, but more importantly, it makes it a lot easier on you, the taxpayer, which that's what we want. We want things to be as easy as possible for you. So
that's right. And again, we can't stress that enough. If you think you might have done that, you've already established your business and you think you might have done that, reach out to us because we can research it for you. I'm going to give one little example here, skipping ahead just a little bit. Let's say you went to your county clerk's office and registered as a certain classification for your business. We'll talk about classes here in a few. And then you went to your city clerk's office and they put you under a different classification for your business. Maybe your business sells different types of things and you kind of fall under one or the other, and you weren't sure yet what your dominant one was going to be, and you registered for a different class at the city and the county. That's going to create two locations for you in our account, in our system, which if it doesn't get fixed, and it's going to actually cost you more because you're going to be registered for two locations. That's just one example of how not having consistent information across the various agencies that you're dealing with can get kind of messy.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's great. Moving on to establishing your tax accounts. This is step 3 of the process for new business. And so you need to know what tax accounts that you're going to be liable for. And it's dependent on, what your primary business activity is. Are you selling services? Are you selling tangible personal property? Is it a mix between the two? Establishing what tax accounts that you need is very, very important. The 3 that you see here are the most common ones that we see. The plethora of businesses that need business tax. And that's a pretty common one. It's applicable if you conduct business or have nexus within any county or city within the state of Tennessee. Another term for city is municipality. And so it's really important to know that if you're liable for business tax, we'll dive into businesses that are exempt from business tax a little later. But ideally, if you conduct any business within a county or city within Tennessee, then you may be liable for business tax. Like I said, there's a few exceptions, but all businesses that sell goods and services, they're going to pay that state business tax. Moving on to sales tax. Again, we have a whole section devoted to each of these taxes. But sales tax, generally, it applies to the retail sale of tangible personal property. And certain services. All right, so there's a couple of services that are taxable for sales tax, but essentially the seller is liable for remitting that tax. So a really good example is, well, sort of an oversimplified example, is if I just go into a retail store and I purchase, maybe a soda, a candy bar, I'm going to pay sales tax on that. And you, the seller, you're going to collect that sales tax from me, the consumer, and you're going to remit that on your sales tax return. And so if you're engaged in the activity of selling tangible personal property or certain services, which we'll cover a little later, then you're going to be liable for sales tax. And again, in conjunction with whatever start date that you register that tax account, that's when tax obligation begins. And even if you don't have any taxes to report, you would still file that $0 return. Franchise and excise. Again, we'll get into this a little bit later, but if you are chartered through the Tennessee Secretary of State as a corporation or an LLC, then you're going to be required to have franchise and excise tax. And so that tax is specific to you being chartered through the Tennessee Secretary of State. There's a couple of other taxes. Katie briefly mentioned the ABC board. So, liquor by the drink, we have that tax specifically. We also have a tire fee, oil fee, tobacco taxes. We actually administer multiple tax types, which will kind of give you some general information on how to navigate on our website to view that list of taxes. But I believe we I can't remember the exact number, but it's quite a bit. And so Of course, there's some taxes where there's not many taxpayers that are liable for it. It's very specific. But those three that we just covered, those are going to be the most common tax types that you may be liable for.
Not a whole lot of people are liable for coin-operated amusements, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But again, we don't have an income tax here in Tennessee, but there's lots of other little ones. I can't remember the exact amount either, Mitch. Just briefly touching on exemptions here, and again, when we talk about each of these three tax types in a little while, we'll dive a little deeper, but again, this could be a full day long or full week long workshop if we really wanted to get really deep into these. But for business tax, there are a few, very few, just a few exemptions. Manufacturers, religious and charitable entities that are selling donated items, certain services, certain service providers are not liable for business tax. Doctors' offices, for example, we'll get into that a little bit later. For sales tax, exemptions are generally divided into three different categories. Entity-based, so the type of entity, certain businesses are exempt from sales tax. Certain products are exempt. You're not going to pay sales tax on certain things, and therefore whoever you're buying those items from, that seller's not going to have to remit it because you're not paying it. And then use-based exemptions. We'll get a little bit into that. F&E tax, we will not be getting into all the different types of exemptions for F&E. It's a more complex tax that we have a great manual on. There are 17 types of exemptions for F&E. Again, we're really not going to dive into that today at all, I'll be honest with you, but we have some great webinars out there in our webinar video archive that break down. I think at this point, we have most exemptions. We have webinars that are dedicated to most of those F&E exemptions. You can check that out. We'll show you where here later.
Yeah, so moving on to TINTAP. So TINTAP is probably one of the more important aspects of starting your business in the state of Tennessee. And the reason why is because TINTAP stands for Tennessee Taxpayer Access Point. So if you are a business owner in the state of Tennessee, this is where you will go to do anything and everything as it pertains to the tax accounts administered by the Tennessee Department of Revenue. That includes filing returns, that includes making payments, that includes petitioning for penalty waivers, submitting claims for refund, updating your addresses, everything, updating your business name if that changes. So everything that we've covered in each of these steps in starting your business, these are things that you can do within TINTAP and you can maintain the maintenance of within TINTAP. We've provided a couple of different images here just as an example of what they look like. So there's there's a sales tax example. We know that it's sales tax because of the SLC after the account number there. But those are what some of the links look like on the home page where you can make a payment. You can view past returns that you filed in the past, or it has links where you can file new returns going forward. There's also a link for additional actions, which that takes you into a couple of different tasks that you can do for your business. If you look at the image behind that, that's an example of a business tax account. Again, some of those links look very, very similar with the exception of the third option. It says additional actions / licenses. There are some jurisdictions, some clerk offices that actually push the license to TINTAP. So when you file your business tax return to renew that, some clerks will actually push the license to TINTAP where you don't even have to really speak to the clerk. You just have to go into TINTAP and print off your license. Now, not all clerks do this. Some clerks have reserved the right to mail out their licenses after a business renews, which we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about licensing. But yeah, TINTAP is a really important thing. Again, we're gonna mention a little bit more information on this very helpful resource a little later in the presentation. Oh, Katie, you're muted, I think.
Yes, I was. I said, thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for that. We are going to take about a 5-minute break. I'm opening up the chat right now. If you have questions specific to tax types, like a business tax question, sales tax question, F&E, save that for our next Q&A session that'll happen after our next, after we talk about tax types. Right now, we'd like for you just to put any questions in the chat regarding specifically, hold on, I can't do two things at one time. Let me open up the chat and then I'll finish my thought there. Let you put it in there to everyone. Let's see. Okay, chat is open. If you have questions specific to setting up your business, any of the topics we've just discussed the last hour or so, then put those in the chat now. When we get back from about a 5-minute break, we'll spend some time going through any of those questions. We have a couple hundred people on here today, so there's no way we're going to get to all the questions. I'm just anticipating that. But at the end of today's presentation, we'll show you how you can send your questions to us if we don't get around to it. So, okay, go take about a 5-minute break. We'll be back here at 9:23. I'll put that time in the chat. We'll see you back here in a couple minutes. All right, that 5 minutes kind of flew by, I think. For me, it did. Hopefully, we've got you all back in here. Lance and Mitch and I will be going through some of these questions that we have in the chat. Lots of good questions in here. I appreciate that. Scrolling through here. Shatana, the very first question I'm getting to here, can we change the fiscal year? That is absolutely something you can change. I'm not going to say that it's super easy to get it all figured out once you do change it. If you started off with something that you don't really like, you don't like the fiscal year you have right now, and you want to change it, we can do that, right, Mitch? Tell us a little bit about that process of
Yeah,
changing
what that
this.
may entail is if you do change your fiscal year end, let's say I don't know, let's say your fiscal year end was December, but you want to switch it to February. In the process of switching it, there's going to be a little bit of a gap between those two fiscal year ends. So you may be required to file a short period return for whatever tax type that we're talking about. However, what we ask is kind of give us a heads up on whenever you feel like you're going to be changing your fiscal year in. That way we can get ahead of it and sort of prepare. That way we're not retroactively doing anything. It's also a good way to hopefully you won't have to pay any penalty or interest. It really just depends on the situation. And so if you do feel like you're going to change your fiscal year end in the future, then give us a heads up on when you think that'll be, and it may require you to file a short period just to fill in that gap.
There's a lot of things you can do self-service on TinTap, but something like that that's a little bit complicated like that. Lance, Mitch, wouldn't y'all say that sometimes it really is best just to reach out to us? We're here. It's really easy to get a human being on the phone with revenue, except for sometimes right around tax filing day. But that's one of those things, changing that fiscal year. I might recommend you actually reaching out to us on that for sure, right?
Absolutely, Katie. That's probably going to require a little bit more information, just coming down the pike from our taxpayers, and that way we can understand a little quicker, we can act a little quicker, and it's just better all around.
For sure. Um, Thanks, Lance. So looks like Dan already answered Jazz here. Is filing your federal tax return separate for filing your return on TinTap? This is a really good question that is so common, especially around this time of year. Everybody's filing their federal taxes. Federal taxes are filed through the IRS. We are the Tennessee Department of Revenue. Just think of it this way, two totally separate entities. Now, your franchise, if you are a business that is required to file franchise and excise tax, I will say it's very close to your federal return. A lot of the numbers from your federal return for your business are going to be what are used on your Tennessee F&E return. But it is, as Dan said and answered your chat, yes, that's two separate returns. If you filed your federal return, you're still going to file with us as well. Let's see here. The Joneses having here. How do you become an LLC if you're a sole prop? So, in general, Lance, what would you say if anybody wants to change from a corporation to a sole prop, or a sole prop to a corporation, or LLC, any kind of entity change? How does that look for us?
Sorry, I was muted. Really and truly, excuse me, you would have to start over. You'd have to start fresh. Going from a sole proprietorship to a LLC or even a single member LLC, you're still going to have to restructure, is what we call it. So, as just a 1,000-mile view of what you have with us, you're set up as a entity. Under that entity, you're going to have all of your different accounts listed. You're going to have your entity ID as a sole proprietorship. It would be your social security number, of course. Now, if you are changing to a multi-member LLC, of course, that social just won't do. So we're going to have to close all of that out. Anything that's under that old social, we're going to have to close all that out, and we're going to have to restructure you beginning with the federal ID number and applying for brand new accounts. It's not as difficult as it seems, however. Thanks to TinTap, we've really streamlined all those processes.
That's right. Along those lines, I see another question here that kind of follows up to that from Stephen. My business was set up in one county, but I moved to another county. This is different, but kind of similar because you're still making a change, right? You're moving your business to another jurisdiction. Guys, what's a good way to explain how that process works?
I can chime in, Lance, if I miss anything, just fill in the gaps. So if you change jurisdictions, it really just depends. If the if your location, if you change locations and it stays within the same jurisdiction, then you probably just have to submit an address change request. It's not really a big deal. But if you're changing jurisdictions, what that's probably going to mean is you're going to have to close out that old business license in that old jurisdiction, and you'll apply for a brand new business license in a new jurisdiction. And so sales tax, you may need to apply for a new location because that tax rate could be different. And it's dependent on that local tax rate. And so there's some of those aspects that come into play. And so it really just depends on where you're moving to and where you're moving from. It may involve closing out some licenses, and obviously you want to close out that old location if that's the case. And then you may have to apply for new licenses, picking up where the old left off. Lance, did I miss anything?
No, Mitch, that was spot on.
Let's see here, guys. I'm scrolling through. We have so many good questions. A few of these I'm going to skip right now because we will be getting to them when we talk about the tax accounts. There's a question here about the filing dates, deadlines, stuff like that. We're going to be getting to those here in a few minutes. What types of professionals need business
I would like
license?
to mention one question says, I'm having difficulty accessing my account on TINTAP. The text verification is taking hours to receive. That is an issue that a lot of taxpayers have been having over the last couple of weeks, and we do apologize for that. What we recommend is you can contact us, and what we've been able to do is we've been able to switch the text verification to an email instead. We really haven't been having issues with emails going through, and so that's one way that we can work around that temporarily. We do apologize that you're experiencing that, as many taxpayers have been having that issue the last couple of weeks.
And you can always choose using one of those authentication apps, right? Those are pretty fail-proof, but it's kind of a little bit of an extra step to get it set up and get an app and stuff. I've noticed that those are the one that using that, because you can either do the authentication app to verify a cell phone or email. I think that authentication app is the one that usually doesn't have issues, but with lots of different carriers for cell phones and different email issues, sometimes those go to spam and stuff. I think the authentication app is pretty fail-proof. Another question about changing from an LLC to PLLC. I think we addressed that. Yes, we are recording this webinar. You can watch it. Usually we get it up around midday the next day. But I would say, let's see, what's today? Wednesday. By Friday for sure, but sometime tomorrow we should have a recording of this webinar posted on our website. You go right to where you registered. We'll show you here in a little while when we take a little website tour, but it's on our taxpayer education page. We'll have a recording of this. So sorry you missed the beginning, but we'll have it there for you. Let's see here. Okay, a good question here. You say to contact us. What's the best way to do that? Email address, phone number. We're going to have a slide at the very end. I'm going to put it up real quick. Let's see, what were we on? 15, so I can remember to get back to it. Let me just go to the very end here and show you that. I think we've got. Sorry. I'm going to put this up here right now in case you're not here at the end. I'm going to go back to the other slide here in a sec, but here's our email support email address and our general tax call center number. If you want to email us, that creates kind of an online ticket for us, and we respond to those typically within a couple hours during business hours. For both phone calls and emails, it gets a little crazier right here as we're inching towards a big major tax deadline, but most days out of the year you can get a human on the phone right away and get a quick answer to an email that you send us very quickly. So jot that stuff down. And again, as I mentioned, any questions that we don't get to during this presentation, send us a message or call us afterwards, because we want to make sure you get the answer you need. We are going to have to go in here and get going again so we can stay on track. and we'll close down the chat for just a little bit longer while we talk about tax types, and then we will open it back up as soon as we come back. So let's see, what was I on, 15? Okay, so we are going to get into taxes now. Exciting stuff. We're going to start with business tax, the most common tax type that we have. This slide presents to you just a brief overview of what business tax is. It is a tax for businesses that is based on gross receipts of sales and services. Anything you see underlined here, we're going to detail a little bit more in some later slides, but we'll tell you about what gross receipts are considered. There's confusion there sometimes. That rate, it's a very, very low rate. And it depends on what classification you are. Different types of businesses have different class rates. And whether you are either a retailer or wholesaler, we'll define that as well. There are a few deductions and credits, very few, that are available to offset tax liability. I do want to say, let's see, what's today? April 5th, 2023. There is legislation going through right now in our Tennessee General Assembly being presented. There's a bill that changes a lot about business tax. Okay, I'm not going to get into that right now, but if you want to take the time later to research it, Senate Bill 275, I can't remember the House Bill companion number, but if you want to look that up, it does change a lot about business tax. So we have no idea if that bill will pass, but it's one of the it's a bill that changes that makes such drastic changes that we would probably have to completely redo this, and a lot of stuff we're talking about today would go out the window if this bill passes, which it's running through the committee process right now. But I just wanted to throw that in there because we'll keep this video if it passes and the governor signs it into law and we got big changes coming, we'll definitely put out probably a huge PR campaign about that, and probably do additional webinars about it and everything. But right now, what we're going to be talking about with business tax is the way the law is currently. Registration for business tax is required for all entities with a standard business license. Again, that's a major thing that is being proposed in this piece of legislation, is the threshold for a standard business license is, the gross receipts threshold. It's also required for out-of-state businesses that have nexus in Tennessee. We'll touch on that just a bit later. There are some entities, as I mentioned, and some services that are exempt from business tax. There was a question that someone put in our chat a little while ago. What about mental health services? That's a great question, and we're going to get to that here in just a minute. Filing. It is due on the 15th day of the 4th month following your fiscal year end. This is where that fiscal year end is important that Mitch was talking about when it comes to setting up your business. If you tell us that your fiscal year end for your business is calendar year is December 31st, then the 15th day of the 4th month looks a lot like April 15th, right? That's the one we're inching upon here. There is a minimum tax due even if you have no gross sales. It's $22 per license and per location. We'll talk here in a minute about how that license is tied in here to the tax. Your business license will expire on the 15th of the month after the tax due date. Again, the business license and the business tax are very closely related. Actually, I think I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide to talk about that. Mitch is going to walk through how the business tax and the business license are related here.
Yeah, so when we're talking about business tax, one of the more important aspects of it is sales thresholds. And so now today is April 5th, 2023, and the bill that Katie was talking about earlier could change all of this. So, but as it is currently, this is how the Tennessee Code annotated defines business tax, and these are the established thresholds. Okay, so if you look at the image here, we have very helpful image that Katie has created for us. So if you have any gross sales within your fiscal year that are under $3,000, then no business license is required. Okay, so you don't have to get a business license. Business tax is also not required. Therefore, there's no renewal process. And so I guess this could be considered more of a hobby, just doing something on the side. but there is no business tax obligation if your gross sales are under $3,000. Now, if it's between 3,000 and 10,000, then that changes things a little bit. So now you would be required to have a minimal activity business license. This is a little different. That still doesn't mean that you wouldn't have to do anything as it pertains to the Tennessee Department of Revenue when it comes to having a minimal activity license. Okay, so if you notice there's no business tax requirement for minimal license holders. You would actually renew that license every year with the clerk. Okay, so the initial fee for a license is $15. And if you wanted to maintain that minimal activity business license each year, you would just pay $15 to that clerk every single year. You would not have to file a return through TINTAP or anything like that. Now, when you start to exceed the threshold of $10,000, that's when you would need a standard business license. Okay, that is when business tax is required. You would file a return with the Tennessee Department of Revenue, which is us. And when you file that return and you pay that annual business tax, to the Tennessee Department of Revenue, that is what renews your license. Okay, so earlier when I was talking a little bit about TINTAP, and when you navigate to that additional actions/licenses link, some clerks will actually push the license to TINTAP after you file your return. Not all clerks do this. We wish that they did, but some just have chosen not to. They continue to want to just send out the license themselves. However, the renewal process is you actually filing your business tax return. That is the most important aspect of the renewal process and paying that business tax. We have a little bit more information on, there's some special rules as it pertains to contractors and out-of-state businesses. We'll dive into that a little bit later. But that's a broad overview of licensing, the process. It's really important to understand that the clerks and us, we communicate with each other. Our systems communicate with one another. So when you file a tax return through TINTAP, our system communicates with that clerk's office. And that's how they know to issue that license. And so we really do try to work closely with the clerks. There's a lot of counties in the state of Tennessee. I think there's 95 total, and then there's way more cities. And so, but we try to work with each of them and try to build good relationships with them to ensure that you guys get your license in a timely manner. Katie, do you want to add
frequently
anything on
asked
that?
question here. Yeah, and I know this for
Yeah.
those of you who I know the majority of people on here already have started their new business. So you may be filing this return this month. Maybe you already did it because you're really on the ball. I don't know. But this question comes up a lot with regards to that filing your return and the license. As Mitch mentioned, we provide information, our system. If you filed your return, you're good to go. Our system lets your clerk know that. Our systems talk to each other. We let the clerk know that. They're the ones who actually, as Mitch said, have to, as I like to say, push that button on their end to issue that renewed license. We get lots of questions around this time of year. Hey, I just paid my business tax. I need my license right now. Well, I would say give it a couple days. Around this time of year, hopefully counties are going in there daily and pushing that button for everyone that's renewing. I think that the majority of counties and cities will be doing that. But just so you know, we cannot actually issue the license. We just let the clerk know that you're good to go, or you're not, but hopefully you are. So just to show you a little bit more, we just verbally explained this, but here's a graphic that might help you understand the way we work with the local jurisdictions. Okay, kind of a flow chart here because it's a little bit confusing how we're closely tied in with the clerks and the business license. So up here in the top left, you see this is your business. You're going to apply for a license with your clerk, city and or county and or city. That clerk is the one that's going to issue the license to you and then share the data. Once you apply for that license, all your applicant data, all the data that you use to apply for that license gets sent over to us directly. And this is some confusion. If you get a license from your clerk, you're going to get a letter from us that says you're now registered for business tax. You can also register for business tax directly with us. The system, hopefully, if we're having consistent applicant data, your info being consistent. hopefully it all lines up and our system knows, oh, we already have them in here. They applied for a license. All that can get a little bit messy and confusing, but just so you know, when you get that license, the data is shared with us. You would get a letter in the mail from us saying, hey, you now have a business tax account. I think that a lot of clerks will let the applicants know when they get the license, hey, you now have business tax. But as my boss, Billy Trout, likes to say, that faucet is turned on the moment you apply for that license locally. You are now on the hook. The faucet's on. You owe business tax now for a standard license, I should say. And by the way, I will mention this: if you've got that letter, if I saw that somebody in the chat mentioned that they were having issue accessing their tax accounts in TINTAP, very common there. What you'll need to do is add access to your tax accounts in that letter that you get from us saying that you are registered for business tax, or if you registered on TINTAP for sales tax and got a letter from us, save those letters, because that's what that letter ID can help you. You'll need that when you add access to your tax accounts. Again, you can call us. It's a question we get a lot. Often throughout the day. We have also got a great tutorial which will show you that on how to do that. But just thinking about the letters here, saving those letters from us, that letter ID is important for helping you get access to your tax accounts on TINTAP. But I'm digressing. So we're at the bottom here, the Tennessee Department of Revenue. We get that licensee information from the clerk. Once you file and pay with us as a business, then we're going to issue that tax clearance. And then hopefully you'll be able to, as Mitch mentioned, a lot of jurisdictions, they push their licenses to TINTAP. Hopefully you'll be able to find that license on TINTAP. If not, you'll get it in the mail or can reach out to your clerk about getting that renewed license. That's just kind of a bird's eye view of the process. It's a little bit convoluted, but this is the way the law is written, how we work with clerks. It's changed over the years, and as I mentioned, it might be changing again. Some of these thresholds, particularly the bill that we've got out right now, I'm going to go back a slide. Particularly, the bill changes these gross sales thresholds. If you want to research and figure it out, and then reach out to your state representative about being in support or not. But the bill does, the last version I saw of it basically raises the standard business license threshold up to 100,000. So under 100,000, between 3,000 and 100, you would just need a minimal license and would not owe business tax. So that's what the bill does in its current form right now. But again, we're not going to talk too much about that because we don't have a crystal ball, right?
Definitely. Yeah. So gross sales is a very important feature when filing your business tax return. We get a lot of questions about what does gross sales mean. So gross sales, it's in a general sense, it's just defined as all gross sales are defined as all sales derived from products and services that are being sold to your consumers. Okay. All sales along with any exemptions and deductions. That's an important aspect of that. You would include any exemptions or deductions that you have in that lump sum when you file your business tax return, and that must be reported on the location for the business tax. Now, of course, any of those exemptions and deductions, they can be claimed on Schedule A of the business tax return, and that way you're not having to pay tax on those sales, but those exemptions and deductions do need to be included in the gross sales amount when you're filing that return. And that gross sales amount is going to dictate how much business tax you owe to renew that license. Okay. There's also some other aspects like your classification, which we'll talk about classification in just a little bit. But all of those factors play into how much you're going to pay to renew that business license, and gross sales is extremely important. I'll also note if you file a $0 return, so your gross sales for a particular location is $0, you will still pay that minimum $22 to renew that license. Okay, so I just want to make that that point right there. Katie, do you have anything to add on gross sales specifically?
I just know that it's so common that people say, well, my business didn't make any money.
Yep.
And I think you made it very clear what the definition of gross sales is, but I'll just reiterate, it's not really about that. It's about how much your gross receipts are for, especially in new business. It's not uncommon in the beginning to not have a good net, right? You've got a lot of overhead, rent, all that. Now, F&E tax, there's a lot more deductions there, but business tax, gross sales is the number we're looking for there.
Yes, I guess the word they confuse it with is they think that it's gross profits, but it's
Right.
not your profits. It's just what are the total receipts that you brought in as a business during your fiscal year. So
I can't find it right now, but you just mentioned, 22 per location, $22 is the minimum per location. There is a question that came about. Lisa said, my business is in a city within a county. Do I file both the county and city? While we're on this topic, I just want to address it. So ideally, yes. When we got in 2018, we got a new tax system that was modernized, and in a perfect world, your city and county are going to be on the same tax return. You'll file both within the same tax return. You'll see it when you open up TinTap. You'll see the locations listed there in that way, but there's still some instances where they're not going to be consolidated for various reasons, and it could be because it just wasn't set up right. But yes, it is a consolidated return. Anything to add to that, Mitch? I just want to make sure I.
No, just in a general sense, yes. If you're paying a city tax on your business tax return, then you most likely will have to pay that county as well. And generally speaking, I would have to look at the tax account specifically and to take a look at how it's structured and business activity and things like that. But
Right.
generally speaking, if you're paying a city, then you're going to have to pay county as well.
Right. Okay, so we mentioned that what you're going to owe for business tax is based on your gross sales and what classification you are, which we'll talk here in a sec about, and whether you're a wholesaler or retailer. Now, I want to make this clear. This is not a decision you make on the front end when you're setting your business up, okay? This is only a question that's going to come about when you go to file, because this might change year to year. The definition of a wholesaler is more than 50% of your taxable gross sales are wholesale sales, which means a sale to a retailer, sale of materials that become part of a product, sale of goods to government or governmental agency or to a nonprofit. You won't know that until it's time to file. Retailer is basically anything that's not a wholesale sale. I love that definition. It's like, okay, but it's true. Basically, if 50% of your sales are not wholesale, then they're retail. You'll have to choose whether you're a retailer or a wholesaler on your business tax return. There was a law that passed this time last year that offers up a certificate that basically if you're an established business, you may have received this certificate. It's basically saying what you have filed as for certain classifications in the past, and that's something that you can provide to that can be provided to you and hold on to those in your records if you ever get audited. If you say you're a wholesaler, you'll need those to prove that. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that correctly, Mitch. If you could add to that, if there's anything that clarifies that, you answer that question a lot more.
No, I think that's great. Yeah.
If you're looking at the PDF, this link, it's a hyperlink that takes you over to the important notice about this new wholesaler retailer certificate that we've got. But again, this is something that you will choose on your return. The wholesaler rate is always a little bit less than the retailer rate. And this is only applicable, I will say, to classes 1, 2, and 3, these certificates. If you're a contractor, we'll talk about contractors. People say, well, what am I if I'm a contractor? How can you be a wholesaler? Well, if you're just providing a service or if you're a contractor, you're a retailer. Is that pretty accurate to say? Would you say, Mitch, if you're a service provider, there's not wholesale services that you
correct. Yeah, in a way, I sort of phrase it as you're retailing your services.
Right.
To the public. And so if you are not a wholesaler, then by default, you'll just be that retailer.
Right. Let's see.
Yeah, classifications. So business tax classifications are another very important aspect to business tax and determining how much you will pay when you file your return. So the wholesaler, retailer rates, that can dictate how much you pay in business tax. The gross sales can dictate how much you pay, but also the classifications can dictate how much you pay. And the reason why is because there is a separate rate for each classification. So What is the classification? Classification, it's each taxpayer is classified by its dominant business activity on a per location basis. Okay, so similarly to how we were talking about the NAICS code earlier, that code specifically defines the primary business activity. That's a little different from the classification because classification only has to do with a business license. Okay, so after you have determined what your dominant business activity is, and again, dominant business activity, that's defined as the business activity that is responsible for generating the major or principal source of the taxable gross sales. That's going to be your dominant business activity because again, you could be a business that's engaged in 2 or 3 different business activities. We want to know which one is generating the majority of those gross sales. That's going to be your dominant. Once you have determined that, then you're going to be able to determine what classification of business license you need. Now, this is a very helpful slide. It kind of gives some information on each classification. Generally speaking, we have 5 different classifications, and then we have subgroups in some of these classifications. For example, Class 1, we have a Class 1A, Class 1B, all the way to Class 1E. And I'm not going to go into each individual business activity. However, this is a really helpful slide. So after this presentation, if you have not registered for business tax yet, this can be a slide that you can look at when determining which classification that you need for your business license. A lot of the clerks are also very helpful. Whenever you apply for your business license, they may even they've registered businesses that have been engaged in your business activity in the past, and they're going to be able to tell you what classification that you need. But it's always good to do the research on your own. We also have this information listed on our website as well. And so, Katie, do you want to add anything more to classification specifically?
Yeah, just a few things with classification. First and foremost, I'd like to say, and I've mentioned this a couple times already, this is one of those that you really need to be consistent on and make sure that when you go to your city and county that you're listed as the same classification. Double check that if you need to, just to make sure, because you don't want to set up duplicate locations really. The few things I want to call to your attention here. So the law is very specific with classifications. You can kind of dive down into each one of these. If you need to zoom on your screen, just push the little plus button there above the slide. But I do want to say Class 2, you'll see there where it says it's the catch-all for tangible personal property that's not specifically listed anywhere else. Everywhere, it's pretty specific, right? If you look at what these, I mean, you got coal, wood, ice, like over there in 3, you've got artwork, fireworks, hearing aids. So it was specific, right? My eyes are jumping around here. If you sell something that you don't see specifically listed somewhere, and that's what your dominant sales are, I don't know, just trying to think of something that's not specifically listed. Nothing's coming into my brain.
Yeah, nothing's coming to mind.
It's pretty, yeah, but there's a billion things you could sell. But something that's not specifically listed here, then you're a 2. It's the catch-all. Excuse me. For anything that's not specifically listed anywhere else. The other thing I want to call to your attention over in Class 3 on the right in the pink section, this is where sales of services are. Mitch is going to talk here in a minute about which services are exempt, but if you sell a service that's not exempt, you're a Class 3, okay? We're going to break that down. We're not going to talk about many other classes here. We're also going to break down contractors a little bit, Class 4, because different rules apply to them. Poor contractors, their rules are kind of complex. But
Yeah.
But just to give you an example of where we're talking about dominant business activity, think about your typical, like a Home Depot. They sell lumber, building materials, tools, right? All that's there under 1B. They may also sell 1C stuff, right? Some nursery stock, farm, garden supplies, tools, okay? Home Depot sells furniture too, right? That's another, so you've got a lot of different things that business is involved in. Or like, think about Cracker Barrel. They sell clothing, they sell candles, they also sell prepared food, right? So we're looking for dominant sales. If you're just now getting started, you're going to probably have to guess at that. If your sales are spread apart, if your products that you're selling are spread apart several of these things. This first year, you might just have to guess what you think your dominant sales are going to be. And this is something that you can change with us by reaching out to us and changing. 'Cause it could change if you're a business that has diverse amount of things that you're offering and selling. But again, just getting started, I just want to make sure to impress upon you to make sure it's consistent. If you went to your city and you went to your county, both, just let's make sure that you're classified as the same thing on both. So.
Yeah, so here's a list of some exempt services as it pertains to business tax. We've got about 16 different categories. So if you are a business that's just recently started or you're about to start and you see that the service that you provide is listed here, then that may mean that you are exempt from business tax. Now, I'm not going to go over every single one of these. I know that we did have a question in the chat pertaining to mental health services. I believe that was a question that was asked, and if that is exempt from business tax. As it pertains to allied health services, I think it's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The 10th bullet point is medical, dental, and allied health services. We encourage any medical professionals to search the SIC Major Group 80. If your profession is listed within SIC Major Group 80, then all of those health-related services, those are exempt from business tax. And so I'm not sure what specifically you do in mental health services, but there's a couple of different categories that it breaks down specifically. And so if you see your particular profession listed there, then it's safe to assume that you would be exempt from business tax. Now, just because you see your service that you provide on this list, that may mean that you may be exempt from business tax for that service you provide, but you may be liable for business tax in some other capacity. And so a really good example would be, if you notice the last bullet point is veterinary services. This is a good example that we try to use. Veterinary services are exempt from business tax. However, if that veterinary office sells any tangible personal property that is liable for business tax, then they may owe business tax on those sales. A good example may be they sell dog collars, or they sell dog treats or dog food, or anything like that. So the services that they provide would be exempt from business tax. But since they are engaged in sales of tangible personal property, they may need to have a business tax account for those sales. Another example would be dentist offices. Dentistry is also an exempt service from business tax. However, if that dentist office engages in the sale of, electric toothbrushes or water picks or trays or anything like that, then they may need to have business tax for those sales specifically. So when you guys are starting your business, just determine, if there's anything that you guys do that may be liable for business tax, you want to not forsake those sales because they could be liable. Katie, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, I think you covered that pretty well. I do want to say we're going to be showing you the business tax manual here in a little while. A few years ago, it used to be a business tax guide. It was okay. It wasn't the best, but now we have this manual that really is so great, and it details everything regarding business tax, and all of our tax types have manuals now that are all great, but specifically the business tax, I have to refer over to this particular section in the business tax manual pretty often because it's a little confusing which services are exempt. And referring back over to that SIC manual through OSHA, like Mitch mentioned, is something that I just had to go there yesterday to help a taxpayer, just because I have to look and see, is this service listed in the major group under the particular area. But if you want more information about services, most services are subject to business tax. Just these are not. So the other classification that's a little confusing, as I mentioned, is class 4 contractors. This one's interesting, and it's one that might be changing if the new law if the legislation passes that's out there right now, these thresholds. But in a nutshell, the rules are different in that for contractors, if a contractor has receipts of more than $50,000 in any jurisdiction, they're going to need to get a license and register for business tax in that jurisdiction, whether it be city, county, and that applies to both in-states and out-of-state contractors. So that $50,000 threshold. Other services, for example, if you're, and this is just talking about building contractors, okay? If you're like a computer contractor, if you do contract work on computers and stuff, that's not what we're talking about here. The law defines contractors as what you think of as, a building contractor doing repairs or installing on tangible, real personal property or repairs to tangible personal property. That's what we're talking about here. They're going to be registering in various jurisdictions that they do work in. For in-state contractors, they have receipts of $50,000 or less in a jurisdiction other than their own. Then those, they may still have to get a license there. That is going to be up to some codes requirements locally. But in terms of tax law, that's not required. Those sales would get reported back to where their company is, their contracting company is based or their domicile. Out-of-state contractors, receipts of 10 to 50,000 in a county must pay the state level business tax. This is a big high-level nutshell of contractors that I wouldn't expect, if you don't know anything about it at this point, I wouldn't expect this to give you any clarity, to be honest with you, because it's kind of confusing. But this link right here, that if you, it's a hyperlink if you're in the PDF of this presentation, will take you to a very recent webinar, the one we do these free tax webinars the last Tuesday of every month. And our webinar that we had just last week was on business tax for contractors. We dedicated a whole hour to it and could have kept going because it is pretty complex. So if you're a contractor or you're a professional that helps contractors, I'm going to refer you over to that specific webinar for more information on this very confusing topic.
Yeah. Moving on with, we get a lot of questions about short-term rental properties. And so, and as it pertains to business tax. And so short-term rental properties are usually defined as 180 consecutive days or less of vacation lodging, including a person's home. Any sales that are generated from that are going to be subject to business tax. Now, taxpayers who own short-term rentals, this is a really important aspect that I think confuses a lot of taxpayers. They only need one business license per jurisdiction where they have properties in. Regardless of how many properties they have in that jurisdiction. A really good example that we get is we have a lot of taxpayers that may have multiple properties in Sevier County, specifically Gatlinburg. Maybe they own like 3 or 4, cabins, and they will get 3 or 4 business licenses for each location of each individual cabin, and they do not need to do that. So if you find yourself in that situation, you do not need to register for each individual location where you have a short-term rental. You only need to have one license, one location per jurisdiction. Okay. So if you have 3 rental properties and they're in 3 different jurisdictions, then in that situation, you would have 3 different locations, 3 different licenses. But if you have 3 properties within the same jurisdiction, you would just need to pick a location, and you would just report all gross sales that are generated from all 3 of those locations on that one location. Because when it comes to business tax, the most important thing is we want to be able to source those gross sales to the correct jurisdiction. Okay. And it's unnecessary to have multiple registered in the same jurisdiction. You just need one, because all of those gross sales are going to be sourced at the same jurisdiction anyways. And so it's a lot less work for you. It's a lot less maintenance on your account. So if you do have multiple properties in one jurisdiction, you just need that one license. We've got a couple of, let's see if we have any more information here. For business tax, gross sales from all properties within a jurisdiction are reported on the return. One important note, rental sales made through Airbnb, VRBO, those should also be included in your business tax gross sales. And so we get a lot of questions. I know that we're talking about business tax right now, but Airbnb, VRBO, a lot of times, I think all the time, they remit the sales tax for the business owner. And so
and occupancy tax, occupancy
Yep.
and sales taxes. So
yeah, and so that relieves the property owner of remitting that sales tax. However, there could still be a business tax obligation, and you'll want to include those sales that are collected by the marketplace facilitator, which is Airbnb and VRBO, you'll want to include that in your gross sales when you file your business tax return. So we also have a very helpful, important notice that breaks down short-term rentals for business tax specifically. That's on our website. I'll once we move to the next slide, I'll find that link and I'll throw that in the chat so you guys can take a look at that. But I think it's just one page and it breaks down short-term rental property specifically.
I've got it right here. I'm putting it in
Okay.
the chat right now.
Perfect.
And we did have a question during our Q&A session about short-term rentals, I believe, unless I just dreamt that.
Let me see.
I think somebody asked, do we have a webinar about it? And that is interesting question because we do not yet, but we are planning on it.
Yes.
It is something that we have on our list of things to address because it is just, and it's why we put a whole slide in here about it. It's so common. So many people are doing this and smart too. I think it's a great thing. But it's still kind of new, even though we've been doing this for a while now. It's just so popular right now. I was telling Mitch yesterday, I was at the Sevier County Clerk's office a couple weeks ago, and every single, and I'm not I'm not exaggerating here, every single walk-in that was coming to get a business license at that county clerk's office was for a short-term rental. During my full day that I spent there, every single one was for that. So that's why we included it in here, and hopefully that will help you if we've got any short-term rental property owners here or professionals that deal with that. This is how we do that. And again, there are other aspects to short-term rentals, and we're looking forward to putting a webinar out there about that. For business tax, exclusions, deductions, and credits, I'm going to refer you again to our manual for more details on this because we could go on and on for a little while about this, but there just aren't many. I say here common exclusions and common deductions, common credits, but all these things are kind of uncommon. Obviously, for common exclusions, people making casual and isolated sales. If I sell my car for $25,000, even though that is above that threshold of 10,000, I don't need to go get a business license. That's a casual and isolated sale. Manufacturers, quarries, all kinds of exclusions. There's exclusions like that. Newspaper peddlers, I think, are excluded. For a detailed list of exclusions, you'll want to refer back to our manual. There are some deductions. Trade-in allowances, that's going to be very applicable to like car dealers. Amounts paid to subcontractors, that's a big one for class 4 contractors. They are able to deduct payments that they make to subcontractors if that subcontractor has a license. Sales of services delivered to customers out of state, that one's something that's pretty applicable. Now that the key word there is delivered to customers out of state. If you've got a storefront here in Tennessee, I live in the Chattanooga area, which is right on the line, right? I've got Georgia and Alabama right here. If someone from Georgia comes into my store and buys something and they walk out of my store with it, that's not considered, well, we're talking services, but tangible personal property, the next bullet. That's not considered interstate commerce because they're leaving my store with that item, or if the service is being rendered to an out-of-state customer here in Tennessee. But if it's delivered to out-of-state, if you have a store and let's say it's an online store and that you deliver, someone orders something that lives out of state and it's delivered, you send in the mail, it's delivered to their location out of Tennessee, that's a deduction you can take from your gross sales. You'll include the amount in gross sales, but then deduct it out. That's a common deduction. Bad debts, certain taxes. A common credit is your personal property tax. I'll explain just a bit about this. You'll see this on your business tax return. We're not talking about real estate property taxes here. We're talking about the tangible personal property tax that as a business owner, it's basically a tax that is going to be on your the tangible personal property that your business owns. You can deduct up to 50% of your business tax liability in personal property tax. So let's say your tax liability is, your business tax liability is $100. That's what you owe in business tax liability. You could deduct up to $50 of personal property tax that you paid if you indeed did pay that much. And we work very closely with the comptroller's office on that as well. It's the comptroller's office. Is that right, Mitch? Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and they've got some helpful information as it pertains to tangible personal property property tax on their website.
Okay.
We can try to find that.
Yeah, I mean, you want to use that deduction or that credit, I'm sorry. If you've paid personal property tax, use it, right? Get your money back.
Yeah, to break down some of the filing aspects of business tax, we get a lot of questions about, hey, when do I need to file for business tax? The majority of our taxpayers, they have a fiscal year end, like we were talking about earlier, of December. This means that their tax is due on the fourth month, the 15th day of the fourth month following the fiscal year end. So if your fiscal year end is December, then that means your business tax is actually coming due in a couple of weeks. And so the due date is April 15th for December fiscal year end filers. Now, this year it's a little different. The due date is actually April 18th. And this is because we try to mirror the federal tax filing due dates. And so this year, when all the federal tax filing requirements that we have as individuals, as businesses, that due date is now April 18th this year. And so we are just mirroring what the IRS is essentially doing. Now, the business license, it has an expiration date that's a little different than the due date of the tax. And the business license expiration date is on the 15th day of the month after the tax due date. So if we're still using the same example of a December fiscal year end business, their return is due April 15th. Their license from last year, that expires May 15th. Okay. And so you kind of have a little bit of a grace period between when your return is due, and you have a little bit of about a month of life on that license until it expires. And this could be because, it may take a couple of weeks for that clerk to send out that new license to you or to push it to TIMTAP like we were talking about previously. And so you should be able to use that old license, approximately 30 days after the due date of your return. But as you approach that 15th day of the month following the due date, you would want to try to figure out, hey, where's my license? Is it in TIMTAP? Does the clerk need to, send it to you? Do you need to contact the clerk? Those are some important things that you're going to have to address depending on what date it is. If you look at this visual that we have, this is just sort of a visual of what I've just explained. And so if we're dealing with a taxpayer that has a fiscal year end of December 31st, they will file and pay their return by April 15th. Their license will expire May 15th. And hopefully by that May 15th date, you will have already received your new license to get you through the rest of the new year. We also have a very helpful webinar on the PDF version of this presentation. That webinar link goes over how to file the business tax return specifically. And so if you have any questions pertaining to that return, any questions about any line items, we get a lot of questions about different line items in the call center. That webinar hopefully may be able to address some of your questions. And so you're welcome to watch that webinar in whenever you have some spare time.
And 'tis the season. Right now would be a good time to watch it. If you have a business tax account, or those of you that started your business in 2022, yeah, this is
just
time if you
one
haven't
more
done it
point.
already.
If you do call us with assistance over the next 2 weeks or so, we are trying to handle as many calls as we possibly can. You may have to wait just a little bit, but don't give up. We'll eventually have a representative come available and be able to assist you. So the wait times may last a little bit longer than normal, but that's just because we're in the heat of tax season. So,
which, Mitch, thank you for even doing this with us today, because I know this is your crazy time with your call center.
Yeah.
I want to just touch on one thing or reiterate something. You talked about that license expiring 1 month after the tax due date. I think there are a lot of people that get confused by that and think that they'll look at that business license date of May 15th and they'll think that's when they have to file by. But guess what's going to happen if you file your business tax return on May 14th? You're going to have a little bit of penalty and interest in there because it's late at that point. April 15th is the due date for the return. License expires on May 15th. Again, that may sound a little bit confusing. Why don't they just make it expire on April 15th? And I do, Mitch, I agree. I'm not sure exactly why. That's just there's a lot of things. It's just the way the law is written, but I would say my best guess too would be just to handle it administratively and give the clerks that month to be able to catch up and issue those licenses and figure out who's renewed and who hasn't. But don't wait till May 15th to file that return. Let's see. All right, moving along to sales tax here. Mitch, you want to cover these basics?
Yeah, so sales tax basics. So we've spent a little bit of time on business tax. Now we're going to transition to sales tax. So generally, this tax applies to dealers engaged in the business of making sales of taxable products. There's also a couple of taxable services in the state of Tennessee as it pertains to sales tax, and we're going to kind of go over some of those. Retailers are responsible for the tax. If you are a retailer and you are engaged in the sale of tangible personal property or taxable services, you are responsible for remitting that tax and collecting it from your customers, from your consumers. And then you will remit that tax to the state when you file your sales tax return. We've got a couple of visuals here that we're gonna kind of go over. Hopefully, I'm a visual learner. I really love these little graphics that we have because it can make a lot of this complex information easily digestible. And so hopefully that's the case for you. Generally speaking, sales tax, we're talking about the sales of tangible personal property. Okay. For the most part, all sales of tangible personal property are going to be taxable unless it's specifically exempted in the law. Okay. So sales could be exempt if the purchase is made by an exempt entity. So think of maybe a church, or think of maybe a school, or a government entity. Those entities are exempt from sales tax. So that if you're engaged in selling any tangible personal property to those types of entities, then those sales could be exempt from sales tax. There are certain products that are exempt. So there's certain healthcare products. That's one example where sales tax is not involved. And then also usage could possibly be exempt. And so think of manufacturing. So they're exempt from sales tax as well. As I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of services that are taxable. Okay. Now, it is sort of the reverse of tangible personal property. Sales of services are generally not taxable unless they are specifically listed by the law as being taxable, or if they are a part of a sale that includes tangible personal property that is taxable. Really, if you're engaged in, if you have different business activities where you sell tangible personal property and that tangible personal property is taxable for sales tax, however, you're also engaged in a service that may not be taxable for sales tax. It really depends on how you invoice that transaction. So if you have one transaction where you have tangible personal property, but you also have a service that you're providing on that tangible personal property, if you lump those together, we call these bundled services. If you lump those together in one transaction, then it makes that whole transaction taxable. Okay. Some taxable services could include repair or installation, cleaning of tangible personal property. This also includes computer software, lodging services and rooms, short-term space rental for making sales, parking and storage of vehicles are also a part of those taxable services. It's important to note that sales tax is made up of two different tax rates. So you have the state tax rate, which is the 7%, and then that is combined with the local tax rate. That is where that sale takes place in whatever jurisdiction. And so, for example, we are in Davidson County. I believe the Davidson County tax rate is 2.25%. And so if I was to sell tangible personal property or a taxable service within Davidson County, I would sell those items at the 7% state tax rate plus the local tax rate of 2.25, making that 9.25. And that would be the total tax that I would collect as it pertains to sales tax. We also have a couple of special rates on food, digital products, and single articles. We've got some really helpful information on our website that breaks down each of those special rates. And so be sure to visit our website, or if you have any questions, you can contact us either through the call center or send us an email, help desk ticket, and we can try to help you determine, what rate you're going to be filing on. We also have a very helpful webinar, again, on the PDF version of this presentation. Just click on that link at the bottom. It's a webinar that breaks down the services that are subject to sales tax. And so that can be a helpful resource that you can use later on if you'd like.
Mitch, there's another webinar. I didn't failed to put the link on here, but that it's pertaining to a special rate. We have a webinar in our webinar video library that's specifically about digital products, sales tax on specified digital products too. So actually, there's also one on single articles. We did that, I think it was last October, webinar specifically dedicated to sales tax on what we call single articles, certain items that are over a certain amount, over $1,600 for that one product. There's a special way the tax is applied there too. So again,
and those can be pretty complex. We get a lot of questions about the digital products and the single article. And so if you are a taxpayer that's watching this currently and you find yourself engaging in sales of those items, I strongly encourage you to use those resources just to make sure that you're doing everything correctly, because it can get a little complex and anxiety inducing, and we want to make sure that you feel like you're doing everything correctly. So
I have a friend that works for a liquor store, which it's uncommon that there would be an item over 1,600 sold at a liquor store, right? But she called me the other day and said, "What about, we just sold a barrel of bourbon for $8,000." I'm like, first of all, who is that person? I want to know that person who bought an $8,000. But yeah, we determined that would be subject to single articles. So I was going to say we're going to just roughly touch on sales tax today. And again, just like everything else, we could probably spend a whole week on it. And I'm going to just say the manual is amazing, the sales tax manual. And we'll show that to you here in a little while. But I'm going to touch on resale certificates. It's a very important part of when you have a sales tax account. As we mentioned earlier, as soon as you open that sales tax account, you will get a certificate in the mail, or you'll be able to access it on TinTap if you go ahead and get your account access on TinTap there. But if a purchaser who is also a retailer buys something with the intent of reselling it, they can present this resale certificate and they won't pay tax on it, okay? So in other words, I have a business and I'm going to sell thingamabobs. I'm going to go buy the thingamabob at this business over here that I'm going to sell, but I'm not going to have to pay tax on it if I present that seller with my resale certificate. Likewise, if you have a business, somebody may come into your business and say, "Hey, I don't have to pay you tax because I am going to be reselling what I'm buying from you." So then you would be responsible as the retailer in maintaining a copy of that. So the bullets here break that down. Seller must retain a copy of the resale certificate. We do recognize resale certificates issued by other states. A certificate of resale is provided to a business when it registers for a sales tax account. Like I just said, you'll get that in the mail or have access to it on TinTap. It's issued by location, and each location would need its own retail resale certificate. So if you've got several shops, several stores, you would get a resale certificate per location, and make sure that you're providing the correct one when you're buying your product at tax-free using that certificate. Just be cognizant of that. They do not expire, but are no longer valid when a location closes. So this, again, if you want to kind of see what one looks like, you can push the plus button to zoom in on your screen. This is just an example of what a resale certificate looks like. I want to make note here that these resale certificates are only for use for products that you will be reselling. So if you have a business and you're going to buy cleaning supplies to clean your business, mops, brooms, whatever to clean your shop after you close, those are not, you're not going to buy those using your resale certificate. You're not reselling those, you're using them. You're going to pay tax on those. This resale certificate is only for items that you are going to be reselling. It's intent for where the intent is to resell it. And we do have a webinar specifically about resale certificates as well. How to verify one if you are a business and someone provides a resale certificate to you, you can go on our website on TinTap, and under information and inquiries, just click on verify a certificate, and you can type in the information provided there. We do get questions about this. I just answered a question yesterday from a taxpayer who actually got a certificate from another state. All right, it was a Kentucky resale certificate. As I mentioned, we do accept resale certificates from other states. How you would verify that, I didn't know how to advise them other than to reach out to that state. I think a lot of states have a similar verification process online nowadays. I can't promise that they all do. This one particular that I'm talking about was Kentucky. I did just a minute of research to try to help them out. It looked like there was a process by which that could be verified. But resale certificates, again, very common. As soon as you open up that sales tax account, as we mentioned, you're going to get that certificate. But also, that's when the faucet gets turned on, the filing requirement. Even if you haven't made sales yet, as Mitch mentioned earlier, you will still, as soon as you open up that sales tax account, you will have to begin your monthly filing at that point.
Yeah. As we talked about with business tax, there's a couple of exempt services. Well, with sales tax, there's also some exempt sales that can be taken advantage of. We're talking about exemptions. We're really talking about these underlying words. We're talking about who the purchaser is and what the purchaser does. Okay. So a couple of examples of who the purchaser is. That would fall under the category of exempt sales. Government entities. Like I said, if you sell items to a school, they may be exempt. They won't have to pay sales tax. So that is who the purchaser is. Another example would be nonprofit organizations. So churches could fall into that category. Nonprofit organizations, they would be supported by offering up a Tennessee exemption certificate or a federally issued 501c3 that they've received from the federal government. And so similarly to how Katie was talking about the resale certificate earlier in the previous slides, nonprofit organizations, they'll be able to provide that Tennessee exemption certificate, or they'll be able to provide that federally issued 501c3 to show that they are actually an exempt entity. As far as what the purchaser does, examples of that could be qualified farmers. Farmers can take advantage of our agricultural exemption, and that can exempt them from certain sales pertaining to their agricultural activities. Qualified manufacturers, they would also fall into the category of being exempt. Also want to mention, if you navigate to our website, go to the homepage, click on the taxes tab, and click on sales tax specifically. We also have a sub-tab for forms, and when you click on that, we have a list of different exemption applications that can be applied for. And so that's where you can navigate to those exemption applications if you find yourself being someone who wants to apply for an exemption. And so just want to educate you guys on the navigation aspects on our website.
One thing I want to mention, Mitch, is that if you're a retailer or dealer, you are not obligated by law to accept any resale
Yes.
or any of these exemptions. All right. You may want to if you want to keep that customer and if you if they supply you with the certificate. But we sometimes get the question by someone who qualifies for one of these exemptions, and they say this business that I'm dealing with, they're not giving. I gave them my resale certificate, or I gave them my ag exemption, and they're not giving. They're making me pay sales tax. Well, they have that right, and if you're a retailer, you have that right. Again, it may not be the best business practice out there, but just wanted to make note of that.
No, that's a very, very good point. We do, of course, we would probably encourage that business to honor that, just because that is, we do allow that in the tax law. But Katie is 100% correct. That does not have to be honored. And then continuing on with exempt, there's also an exemption based on the product that's purchased. And so examples of this could include gasoline, textbooks, school meals, number of healthcare products. So sales of qualified industrial machinery, research and development machinery, agricultural items, etc. These must be supported by corresponding exemption certificates. So again, if you are to honor these as being exempt sales from sales tax, then the purchaser would need to provide you a copy of their exemption certificate to show that they are able to purchase those tax-free. And then we also have this concept of interstate commerce. This was mentioned a little bit in the exemptions deduction section of the business tax slides, but it's also something that can be claimed on the sales tax return. So again, interstate commerce, these are basically any sales that take place by a purchaser outside of the state of Tennessee. And so if you engage in the sale of your product or your services and the purchaser takes possession outside of the state of Tennessee, then those sales would probably fall into the category of being interstate commerce. And you would still report them in your gross sales. However, you could exempt those out on the sales tax return because you just didn't collect any sales tax on them. And so you'd want to be aware and keep track of all interstate commerce sales that you have throughout a filing period. And as far as when to file, so sales tax, the majority of our taxpayers, they file on a monthly filing frequency. And so this is always due on the 20th day of the month following the end of the period. So if you're filing monthly, let's say you start your business in January, your January sales tax return, that's going to be due on February 20th. Okay. And then it'll just continue on. February's return will be due March 20th. March's return will be due April 20th, and so on. There is no option for filing extensions as it pertains to sales tax. Now, we do have a couple of taxpayers that fall into different filing frequencies that are separate from monthly. They could fall into a quarterly filing frequency, or they could fall into an annual filing frequency. This just basically, quarterly means that they file 4 times a year, whereas annual, they only file 1 return a year. So we have a couple of taxpayers that fall into those categories for different reasons. It may have to do with the makeup of their business. It could also have to do with their sales thresholds. And so those are a couple of factors that play into defining what the filing frequency will be. But like I said, sales tax accounts are generally set up as monthly. We also have a very helpful webinar. I know that we've talked about past webinars, but we really want to talk those up because they're really helpful resources. We have one that we've done in the past that breaks down how to file your sales tax return specifically. So again, after this is over and you're looking at the PDF version of this, please visit that webinar if you have any questions pertaining to how to file your sales tax.
Thanks, Mitch. We're going to just spend a minute talking about franchise excise and some other tax accounts because, like I said, franchise excise is pretty complex, and just like every other topic that we've covered today, this one really could be a week-long session. But what is franchise excise tax? We mentioned earlier that if you are registered to do business in Tennessee as an LLC, corporation, etc., you're going to owe franchise excise tax. It's not going to be pertinent to you if you're a sole proprietorship. I want to make that clear. But it is a combination of 2 taxes. Franchise tax is the greater of net worth of or the book value of real or tangible personal property owned or used in this state. And excise tax is net earnings or income for the tax year. We do have a great webinar that breaks this down a little bit more. F&E, it's called F&E Basics. So if you want more information that gives you a general overview, as I mentioned earlier, it's very much in line with your federal return. All for-profit foreign and domestic entities chartered, qualified, or registered in Tennessee doing business in Tennessee must file the F&E tax return and at least pay the minimum. You know, we mentioned there was a minimum tax due for business tax. There's also a minimum tax due for F&E. Entities are subject to this tax from the date of formation in Tennessee. And even if you're not yet registered with the Tennessee Secretary of State, you're going to be liable from the date you begin operations with substantial nexus in this state. So again, like I said, if you have in your name that you are an LLC or that you're incorporated, starting from that day that you register with that name, with us even if you haven't yet registered with the Secretary of State, you'd be liable for F&E tax based on that date. There is the possibility to receive an extension for F&E tax. This is the only tax type that we have where there is this option, generally speaking. Now, that's not to say that for both business tax and sales tax, sometimes natural disasters, the governor has issued that we can extend people in certain counties the ability to file other tax types a little later. But F&E tax, you can extend it just like with your federal taxes. The cool thing is, just was this last year or year before last? Very recently, they changed it from a 6-month extension to a 7-month extension. That makes a lot of CPAs out there very happy. So well, we've got a little timeline here in a minute, but a 7-month extension looks a lot like if you have a regular fiscal year of December and your tax returns due on April 15th for F&E, it's extended to November 15th if you have a valid extension. Just a little bit of information about extension. You'll owe 90% of the current period's liability or 100% of the previous period's liability, or $100 if a previous period does not exist in order to get that extension. It's automatic. That extension automatically happens once once that payment is received, and or you have a valid federal extension. We, just like some other organizations, we do communicate with the IRS regarding that. So if you've filed a federal extension for your business, we'll receive word of that from them if it's a valid extension. So this is the graphic that explains the filing for F&E. Again, like our other timelines with sales tax and business tax, we're assuming here that this business in this example has a 12/31, a December year end, fiscal year end. File the return or have a valid extension or pay that $100 minimum by the 15th day of the 4th month, which looks a lot like April 15th. Or, as Mitch mentioned, if the 15th falls on a weekend or holiday, it's going to be the next business day, which this year's actually falls on a Tuesday because the 15th falls on a weekend and we're off. It's a federal holiday on Monday, the 17th. Is that right? Do I have those days right? I think so. I think
Yes.
yeah. That deadline is going to be on November 15th, which is 7 months after the filing deadline. And certain businesses, I can't remember if I have a slide here about this. I do not. Certain businesses, and more information about this, you can find more information about this in our manual or on that F&E Basics webinar. If you make a certain amount, if your business has a certain amount of tax liability in the previous year, you are going to be required to file F&E quarterly. It's not actually technically quarterly because it's not quite every 3 months. That just kind of bugs me, but we call it, that's why they call it estimated payments, all right? A lot of people still call them quarterlies, but you can see here the dates that those quarterly payments would be due. And just like with any, we'll get to this in a minute, a little bit about penalty and interest. If one of your quarterly payments is late, you'll also owe penalty on that as well. So real important to pay attention to those deadlines. As I mentioned, there is a minimum tax due for F&E. This is so easy to do. It's $100, so it's a little bit more than the business tax minimum. That $100 is so easy to do. The F&E return typically is kind of complicated. I would say, I hesitate to say this, but for your average person like me, I'm actually not like a tax professional. I was an English major, which is funny that I work here, but I don't think I could file my own F&E return. Mitch, I bet you could file one. If you had a small business, I bet you could do it. I bet you could handle that. But this minimum return is super simple. On our TinTap, without even logging in, I always advise people that just without even logging in, do it this way. On TinTap, go to returns, return links, file minimum F&E, and then you put just a little bit of information in there. You just don't want to miss this deadline because tax penalty and interest on F&E, even if your business did not have anything going on with it, has no tax liability, taxable income or property owned or whatever, if you miss this deadline, your penalty automatically is $25 and interest accruing from the day it's late. So we'll get to that here in just a minute, but it's super easy to do, so don't miss it. A little bit of information about other taxes. We have, oh, here's the number, Mitch, over 24 different
There you go.
state taxes and fees. Over 24, that's a lot. Some major ones that might apply to your liquor by the drink, tire, motor fuel, tobacco taxes. There's actually a bill out there right now that I looked at the amendment to yesterday that's we're going to have a new hemp tax on cannabinoids, like so CBD products and stuff like that. So new tax type may be coming if that bill passes. Won't surprise me if it does. But we've got a lot more information about the other taxes on our website, and keep mentioning these manuals. You're probably annoyed with me mentioning the manuals over and over and over again, but it's because I love them so much and cannot recommend them enough. And there are manuals out there for the other tax types, not all of them, but for the major ones like liquor by the drink, the alcohol taxes, and our audit division is putting manuals out just often now. There's going to be one for marketplace sellers coming soon. I heard, Mitch. I don't know if you've heard that, and also one for short-term rentals. A whole manual dedicated to that. So great information there. Just a little bit about delinquencies, collections. You're going to have to pay penalty and interest if you are even a day late. Penalty is 5% of the unpaid amount is added for each month or part of month that payment is delinquent or deficient. So even if you've paid but not paid enough, that's what we mean by deficient there. It's a maximum of 25% of your tax liability will be in penalties, and interest is computed at a current rate of interest. We don't want it to come to this, and this is why we do things like this new business workshop, to try to educate you so that you don't get into collections. We really don't like it when it gets to that point, but we do have a process by which we have a collections division, and where we're trying to, a lot of times it's just educating taxpayers. They didn't even realize that that they were late. Maybe moved and didn't give us the mailing address, or they closed a business and didn't tell us that they closed it, and so we're just expecting that return, and when we don't get it, you fall into collections. I will say our webinar this month, our free webinar that's on the last Tuesday of the month, is about tax compliance and the collections process, so you can register for that on our website. If you have overpaid, it's very easy to request a refund. As Mitch mentioned earlier, you can do that on 10 taps. So just a little bit, I don't think we have very many out-of-state businesses on here today, but Nexus is the requisite contact between a taxpayer and a state before the state has jurisdiction to tax the taxpayer. We have a couple of webinars on this specifically that we're just linking over to. You can link over those directly from our PDF if you're an out-of-state business. Nexus for out-of-state businesses and reporting out-of-state sales by delivery destination, 2 webinars that might be helpful to you. I'm kind of rushing right now because I want to stay on track and give you a quick 5-minute break. Yep, we're here. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. I'm going to open chat back up, and we'll be back here, let's say at 10:50. I'll put that in the chat and open up. See, look at me, I can't type and talk at the same time. 10:50, back from break. I'm opening up the chat now. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Put any questions you have regarding the tax types we've talked about. If I do want to tell you, do not put specific questions that are specific to your business that would include any account information or anything like that in there. We're looking for general questions. There we go. Chat is open, so throw them in there. We'll see you back in a few minutes. All right, everybody, another quick 5 minutes that flew by. Told y'all we had a lot of information to give you today, right? I wasn't lying. Okay, well, we've got a ton of questions in the chat. Thank you all for that. We'll kind of work our way down here, focusing on, since we've got several hundred people in here today, focusing on some of the questions that are more universal, so to speak. Let's see, Mitch or Lance, do any jump out at you that you would like to address right here in the moment?
See one question on here about the manuals and if they are downloadable. They are. You just have to go to our website, and if you on our homepage, click on the taxes tab, and then navigate to whichever tax that you need to download that manual for. When you click on that tax, that link to the manual is going to be on that screen. You may have to hit additional resources, or I'm not sure exactly what that link is, but that will help you navigate to that link where you can download that PDF of the manual. So
Here in a few, we're going to go on I'm going to take everybody on a field trip over to our website too. So
Also, someone asked a great question about guidelines toward determining the filing frequency. I would love to say that there is, but truthfully, there are so many factors that go into that during the application process, and each application is based on a case by case basis. So determining that is an internal thing. It's not a checklist that you can say my client's doing this, they're doing that, they're not doing this, therefore they'll be monthly. Um, I, so sad to say, but that's not out there for viewing.
but it's yes or no, right? Correct me if I'm wrong here, Lance, but when you're
Mhm,
registering for the sales tax account on TinTap, those
mhm,
questions that you're answering, what you're saying, the yes, no, I'm this type of business, I'm that type of, here's how much I'm expecting to make. Those are the questions that
mhm.
are going to determine it. We just don't have a checklist, but it'll walk you through that process when you're registering.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely, Katie.
that's good. Okay. It would be kind of cool to have some kind of chart or something, wouldn't it, though? Maybe we should. Maybe we
It
could.
really would. Yeah.
yeah.
Don't have it yet.
Nathan
Right.
had just a general question about being held up and joining the meeting late, asking if this is being recorded. We did mention it earlier. It is being recorded, and you can view this workshop later on. It should be posted probably halfway through tomorrow, I would assume, the halfway point. So
That's right. Tracy says, can our CPA firm file the F&E tax separately, not in TinTap? Electronic filing is required now, but not necessarily in TinTap. If you file through, if you file your federal return through most tax software, it's going to automatically file your state F&E return if that is a relevant tax to you, but it is required to be filed electronically. The paper return, you can use it, but you'll pay a little penalty for filing using paper. I don't know if that answers your question, but when you say not in TinTap, paper, there's a fee. Other electronic ways are fine.
A question was asked also, do we need to open business tax account even if we do not have a business license? On that, I'm going to say if you are already in business and it's just the fact of going through the natural progression, you intend to make over 10,000 and you've just not got to that county clerk's office yet or not purchased that business license, sure, you can open the business tax. That's not a problem. Naturally, and the easiest thing is to follow that path that was described earlier. Go to your county clerk and purchase that business license and allow them to share that information with us. And certainly, if you do not qualify for a business license, in other words, if you're making $2,000 a year, you're not going to need a business license, and therefore you're not going to need a business tax. Okay.
That's right. Linda says, even though you had 0 sales in 2022, do you still have to file an F&E return? If you have an F&E tax account because you're an LLC, incorporated, you've registered with Secretary of State, yes, you would, even with 0 in sales, you would need to file just a minimum return. That was that process I was showing you. I'm going to go back a few slides here, Linda. This process, so you'd have to file a minimum. It just walks you through a few questions, takes about 2 minutes to do so, but you want to do that. If you have an F&E account, you need to do that. You need to file this even with no tax liability, even with zero in sales or nothing that your business owns. You would need to do this because you don't want to have to file, you don't want to owe penalty and interest there for sure.
And that is assuming that you want to keep that entity active. And so, of course, if you want to close the entity, you would just, file a final return. But yes, if you want to keep that entity active and you didn't have any sales for 1 year, you would still need to file that minimum. So,
Mitch, you bring up a great point there that we really don't have a lot of focus on in this webinar. I think it's been just mentioned on a few of the slides, but closing accounts is very important. If you're a new business or you're thinking about it, you don't want to think about this yet, but at some point in time, you may need to close that business for whatever reason. And I would say I worked in our collections division for a short time, and I would venture to say that the vast majority of issues and tax accounts that end up in collections were businesses that shut their doors and closed down, but never closed out their tax accounts or failed to do so properly. So just a very important step to not just put it on your back burner. If you're a new business, hopefully you'll be in business forever and ever and ever, right? Because you'll just thrive, and that's what we all hope for. But sometimes things happen and you have to close it down. The last thing you want to worry about after your business closing is having to deal with little nasty grams from the Department of Revenue and collections letters and calls and all that stuff. So we've got information when we take our little field trip over to the website later. I'll show you where there's some good information about how to close. But yes, Mitch, correct. If you want to terminate that business, filing a final return is pretty much the way for all tax accounts. There's going to be one of the steps involved is making sure you file a final return and then closing it out. It's pretty easy to close after you do that. Make sure all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted. I always say that wrong. Did I say that right? Yeah. But we'll show you that resource here in a few. What else, guys? I was yapping so much now I need to get back over.
no, you're great. I was just looking through.
Fruit bat, I like that. If I'm not mistaken, you mentioned even if we haven't made any sales yet, we must still pay sales tax even if it's zero. Now you don't pay anything as long as you do it on time. If you've not collected any sales tax, as long as you file zero timely by the deadline, you're going to owe zero because you didn't collect anything. The only reason you would have to pay anything would be if it's late. Penalty and interest, like I said, it starts ticking at day one of a late return. So for sure, if you've got no sales, you didn't sell anything, so no customers paid you sales tax that you need to then remit to us. It is painful for me to see late sales tax returns on zero sales because, I don't want to see anybody have to pay for something that they just didn't even, you're not even doing anything and having to pay there. So don't be late. Get off my soapbox on that.
Everett had one question. How do we file extensions on franchise and excise, or what is the proper form? The proper form is the FAE 173 form. However, you can file for this extension in TINTAP, and so just as long as you do it by the due date, then you should be fine. So.
All right, we're going to dive back in here, y'all, to the last section of today's business workshop, which is all of the resources that we have. All right, I'm going to close chat back down just temporarily. We'll save some time, even if we have to rush here at the end because we're chatty people. We'll save some time at the end for more questions. So, and again, if we don't get to your questions today, we're going to share with you again resources on how to reach out to us. So with that, let's see here. Let me get myself caught up here. All right, Mitch, you want to talk about a little bit more about TINTAP here for a bit?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, in the step, I think it was step 6 of starting a new business, the resource that we have on our website, TINTAP is a very important aspect in starting a new business in the state of Tennessee. This, again, it stands for Tennessee Taxpayer Access Point. So this is where you're going to be able to access all of your tax accounts for your business. If you're a CPA or an accountant, this is where you can interact with all of the tax accounts for your clients. We get a lot of questions when businesses start on how do I get on TINTAP? Well, it's just like anything else. You would create a username and password, and that username and password would be how you would log in to your accounts each time you need to take care of a return or make a payment. And we have some really helpful help desk articles on how to create your username, how to create your password. And Katie had mentioned also gaining access to your accounts. That's a question that we get a lot in the call center and on Zendesk as well, on how do I gain access to my accounts. We have a lot of helpful resources on our website that sort of walk you through the instructions on how to do that. But if you run into issues, of course, we're here to help in the call center. You can also submit a help desk ticket. But again, I just want to reiterate, TINTAP is the place where you can register for tax accounts. You can register for new locations. It is where you can electronically file any and all returns that you have that are administered by the Tennessee Department of Revenue. You can schedule payments in advance. That's actually a very helpful feature. We have a lot of taxpayers that may file a return way before the due date. So the due date for business tax, for example, is coming up. It's April 18th, but some people may have filed their return in February just because they were ready, but they didn't want that payment drafted just yet. They want that payment drafted in April. So TINTAP allows you to set that payment to be drafted in the future. So you can schedule payments in advance. You can make corrections to previously filed returns. That's another question that we get. Taxpayers try to, they'll file their return and realize, oh, I made a mistake. Maybe I overreported or maybe I underreported. You can make amendments to your returns. So that's a really important feature. You can also access previously filed returns. And so if you ever need to access those filings for different reasons, maybe you need to recall on what you filed on the February 2019 filing period way back when, you can actually go and navigate to that filing period and see exactly what you filed, see exactly what you paid, and see all the activity on that period. So that's really, really helpful. And so if you have recently started a new business and you are unfamiliar with TINTAP, then give us a call or navigate to our website on that link, www.tn.gov/revenue, and you'll navigate to that TINTAP image for e-file and pay. And you'll want to create that username and password. We also, let's see, actually, is this my slide, Katie? I can't remember. I think it is. Yeah, you're muted. I think it is. So TINTAP also, we've got this resource on our website called Revenue Help. This is an extremely helpful resource. We have, as I mentioned previously, we have different instructions that you can access on how to navigate TINTAP, on how to create a logon, on how to register for a tax account, or how to submit a TINTAP payment, or how to file various tax returns. We have a bunch of these how-to videos that can sort of assist you in completing all of these various tasks in TINTAP. Revenue Help also stores a lot of what we call help desk articles. And when you navigate to Revenue Help, you can search keywords of just different questions that you have. Let's say you've got a short-term rental and you want to know some information about short-term rentals. You can navigate to Revenue Help and search short-term rentals, and that will produce every article that we have pertaining to short-term rentals, whether it be about sales tax or business tax or anything else. And so if you do have any taxability questions or just want some general guidance on how to handle certain situations, Revenue Help can be a very, very helpful resource for you. And then also we have this tool on the TINTAP homepage. It's our TINTAP Assistant. You can ask various questions and it will provide you with some surface level information. It's not, going to provide anything that's overly detailed, If you do ask a very, very specific question, it's probably going to encourage you to send a message to us in the form of a Zendesk ticket, or it's going to give you a listing of our contact where you can give us a call. But this can actually be a very, very helpful resource as well if you just have some general questions. And so we invite you to use that and give it a try.
It searches our help database, and I put when I made this slide, I took a snip. This is one of the things that I do when I'm chatting. Before I realize if it's a bot or not, I'm like, I've got some specific stuff here. I need a real person, and here's an example. It'll tell you at that point, send us a message or give us a call if it's something that it is just a bot, in other words.
And I believe that send a message link directs them straight to where you can submit an actual like message to a real person. It may take an hour or two to get a response, but just know that you have that tool available to you. We also have when you actually gain access to your accounts, this is what the TinTap homepage looks like. And so there's a lot of really, really cool features on here. And so we're going to focus on each of the red boxed or circled sections. At the very top, you've got the TinTap little house icon. I typically will encourage taxpayers, hey, if you ever feel like you got lost in TinTap, because there's just so many places to go in it, you can navigate back to the home just by clicking on that little house icon, and that'll take you back to home. So that's a really helpful tool. You also have all of these sub-tabs, and so the sub-tabs can be a really helpful place for you to navigate to specific things. And so one example is the Action Center. The Action Center will show you a number of notifications where it requires your action. Okay, so maybe you need to file a return. That's an actionable item that you need to take care of. Maybe there are some letters that you haven't read. If you notice right here, Jim Jones Corp have 7 unread messages. And so that's an action item that TinTap is going to encourage them to do, because we want people to see the communication that we send to them. It will also show you, if you have a balance to pay, that's an action item for you to take as a taxpayer. And so if you see any of those indicators, I don't know about you guys, but I don't like notifications on my phone. I'm one of those guys that likes to just clear them all out as soon as I get them. And so if you do see that notification on the Action Center, then that's something that does need your attention. And be sure to clear that out and make sure that everything is taken care of under that section. Let's see. You've also got the More tab. The More tab is to the right of the Settings tab. This is where you can take care of a lot of aspects on your account. If you notice, we have it broken up into a couple of different tiles. The first tile is Manage Accounts. This is where you can register for new tax accounts. If you find out that there's a tax account that you don't have and you need it, you can do that. If you need to register for a new location, you can do that there. When you gain access to your accounts, that's where you'll do that. We have a payment tile. That's where you can request for a payment plan. If you happen to fall behind on a tax liability, and you are in collections, then you have the option of submitting a payment plan. There's a couple of requirements when you submit a payment plan. For example, you have to have all returns filed in order to have that payment plan approved. But we have that. Additional services, we have a couple of different options there. And so those are just different tasks that different types of taxpayers will need. You can print a certificate, you can request for a refund, you can submit a power of attorney. Probably one of the more important links on that particular tile is obtain a franchise and excise tax clearance. And so we have a lot of taxpayers, especially this time of year, that need a tax clearance to provide to the Tennessee Secretary of State. And so that's, if you filed all of your returns and made all of your payments and your franchise and excise tax account is in good standing, but you need a clearance letter for that, that's where you'll navigate to obtain that franchise and excise tax clearance. You'll notice that in the center tile, there's a place where you can update your names and addresses. So if names and addresses ever changes, you can edit that information. And more importantly, you also have a tile specifically for the letters that we send you. And so you can view any and all communication that we have sent you in the past, any historical letters. Let's say, man, I think I received a letter like 6 months ago, but it was about something and I can't remember what it was. You would go to view letters, and then you can search certain date ranges of when you would have received that letter. And so that's a really helpful resource as well.
Mitch, I have it cut off here in the screenshot,
Yeah.
but submissions is one I like to, you can barely see it down there in the bottom left. You see like half the word where it says
Yeah.
submissions. I like to point people here because a lot of people have questions about what they've done. They say, I think I filed, but I'm not sure. I think I made a payment. This is where you can view basically everything that you have done on TinTap. I think it's a really helpful tile, and I wish I might redo this slide and make it a little bit more visible. Another thing I want to bring people's attention to is we did a kind of a bonus webinar. Actually, it wasn't our typical last Tuesday of the month webinar, but in January we did a webinar on TinTap third-party access. It was geared towards third parties, CPAs and accountants that may, or anyone that would be, if you're a business owner, anyone that might have the ability to file returns, make payments and such on your behalf. But there's also a lot of good information in there about how to manage third-party access if you're the taxpayer. As Mitch mentioned, we always want to recommend, even if you don't want to deal with any of this stuff, right? You just want to run your business. You're hiring somebody. It's worth it to you to hire somebody to deal with all this tax stuff. We still want to recommend that you have master level access to all of your tax accounts. I like to say it's kind of like having at a glance with your bank account. You want to at least be able to go in there and see. Of course, you're not going to hire someone that you don't trust to take care of your tax account stuff, but it's still nice to see what's going on at a glance. And in doing so, also, you would be able to, let's say you've hired somebody to do all this stuff, but you want to change directions and go hire another CPA firm, or hire another accountant, you would be able to manage all that. But there's some specific ways to point you in how to do that, and I'm just going to recommend that webinar as a really good resource. In the webinar video library, just put the keyword in TinTap. I think that that's one of the only TinTap ones we've had, so a good resource there. Was there anything else on?
I just really wanted to echo what you said about, if you're the business owner and you want to hire a CPA or an accountant to take care of this for you, that's wonderful. There's a lot of really, really good CPAs and accountants out there. But just because you've hired someone to take care of this for you does not always guarantee that they're going to take care of it for you. And so we really do want to encourage business owners, even if you have hired someone to take care of it, it really is important for you to have access to your own accounts just to see if everything is going on. And maybe you just want to log into it every so often and just make sure that everything is okay. I can't tell you how many times we've received calls in the call center where someone just says, I didn't know I had to do this, and they're, 3 years behind. And so we never want taxpayers to be in that situation. And so we're here to help. But we want to try to advocate for transparency, and we want to make sure that all business owners have access to their tax accounts and have a global view of everything that's going on. That way, they avoid any pitfalls they may encounter going forward. So I really I'm glad you brought that up, Katie.
It's a good way to put it, a good global view.
Yep.
All right, well, now we're going to spend just a couple minutes. I'm going to put the rubber to the road here and show you how to get to a lot of these places we've been talking about and yapping to you about all morning. I'm on our main webpage now, tn.gov/revenue. You've been here before. If you are in this webinar, then you registered by going here, by starting here. On our main webpage here, I'll just point out a few things where you can get to from these tiles. The drop downs also get you to the same place. One quick place under How Do I like to point people here, when you have some time, hang out on our website for a little while. This is going to be a very quick tour of our website, but I would recommend you going in here. The more you know, right? Knowledge is power. It's cliche to say, but when it comes to this kind of stuff, it really is true. I would say get yourself familiar with each of these drop downs. One particular thing I want to point you to here, there's lots of great information, but close a business. This is where I was pointing to. If when the time comes, just remember that this is here, this link here, and under close a business will kind of detail how under each business tax type, specifics on what you would need to do to close your business out. Back to the home page here, though, where I'm going to start actually is just the general tax pages. You can get to it by clicking on the tax type you're wondering about on this drop down, or you can click on the taxes tile. Under each of these tax types, we'll start with business tax, but here, I'm going to scroll quickly. These are how many taxes we have here. There's lots. But business tax. All right. We've got a navigation pane over here on the left. I guess that's what you call that, navigation, to several other items of interest for this tax type. Now, each tax type is going to look kind of similar, but may have some different information on it that's pertinent just specifically to that tax type. For business tax, for example, there's information on classifications, retailer versus wholesaler, the due dates and rates here. This is just an example here. I was telling you earlier that the tax rate for business tax is really low, but you can see here just how low it is. And this is based on gross sales, 0.00 something in most cases here. But I'm going to come on down to important notices and other resources. Each of our tax types that you're going to click on here under taxes is going to have at least this, and this is one way where you can get over to that manual I was telling you about. There's another way too, but under important notices and other resources, if you click on the tax manual, I'm going to go ahead and do it here. Like I said, I'll show you a different way. A bird just flew into my window. Tax manual, I'm going to click on it. I saw a question in the chat. Someone said, can you get hard copies of the tax manuals? I will say this, you can print this out. It's long. You're going to waste a lot of paper and ink. And I wouldn't really recommend that. You can do it if you want to. The reason why I wouldn't recommend printing it out is that we do update this manual here. Look, we just updated it last month. You can see prior versions here. You don't want to, that would be a lot of ink and paper if you were printing it off every time we updated it, right? But you can save it though to your favorites. But I'm going to open up our current manual here just to give you a little idea of what it looks like. You may be aware of this, but anytime you're on a web page or a PDF on a website, if you click Control F, you can type in any keyword to search the entire page, or in this case, this whole PDF document. That way, contractor, you can see here I've got 147 instances of the word contractor in here. I'm going to close out of that though, but just to briefly show you the information and how it's organized, I'm going to scroll kind of slowly through the table of contents of the business tax manual here. Wanting to call to your attention information about how to determine gross sales. You can see here what's excluded from sales price, specific information about each of these classifications. We did not talk about it today, but there's antique malls, flea markets, and gun shows that has its own whole section, transient vendors. Information here on retailer versus wholesaler, a little more on that, filing requirements, sourcing and distribution, exemptions and exclusions. This is where those exempt sales of services that are exempt from business tax. If you want a little bit of more information on that, this is a great chapter. You can see we go into great detail here. Didn't go into much into persons or entities that are exempt from business tax. Told you that our manual has great information on it. Well, here you go. Here it is. So deductions, credits, industry specific guidance, great information here on contractors, the agriculture industry. Don't want to point out too much more, but just so you see here just how extensive this resource is. Now, if you were to click on another tax type, for example, sales and use tax, again, this menu over here to the left looks a little bit different because there's some specific information about sales and use tax that it's breaking down for you here. I'm going to click on just one of those, marketplace sellers. Do want to mention this regarding marketplace sellers. I'm putting a lot of plugs in for our webinars, but we did do, and I know this affects a ton of people, we had a webinar a few months ago on e-commerce. So if you are involved in selling things on the internet, I'm going to recommend that webinar in our webinar video archive. But so anyways, just showing you what a subpage looks like here regarding sales tax. And again, back to that sales tax page, if I were to click on important notices and other resources, that's one way I can get right over to that sales tax manual. Back over to our main homepage here. This is how you get over to TinTap, which is where if you have not already created your login, you would do so by click create a logon. If you already have, this is where you would log in. Some other tiles down here that I would invite you to explore at your leisure just to see what all's available. There's a lot. There's a lot available. So back over to the main homepage here. A couple other things I want to point out. Revenue Help. Mitch mentioned Revenue Help. This is a great website that just to show you under TINTAP alone, all the different sections you can search for information about. These are help articles. Under TINTAP payments, you can see here we've got 18 articles altogether. You click here to see all 18, but this is where you would type in any kind of search item here, keyword. At the bottom of this screen, you can submit a request here, and it walks you through a couple little questions. This gets a message directly over to us. So if you're looking for an answer, you can't find it over there in Revenue Help, or just get sick of looking, you can't find it in a manual, or you're in a hurry and just want to reach out to us, this is how you could submit a help ticket directly to our help staff. So that is Revenue Help. To take you directly to all of our tax manuals, I'm going to point you over to Tax Resources and Tax Guidance. We'll click on just the whole Tax Resources. Tax Resources, Tax Guidance. I'm just going to spend a minute here because I want to give some more time for questions, but look at all the different tax manuals we have here. We've got a lot of tax manuals. What else? Lance, Mitch, what am I? Oh, I know. Taxpayer education and outreach. All right, you came here, you clicked on new business workshops to register for today. To register for any of our tax webinars, you would click here. Tax webinars, and that archive that we've mentioned a million times now is right here, webinar video library. You can search for keywords here, but just to show you, we've got 46. There's 46. Let's show 50 here. These are just all of the webinars we have done. You can click on the video of it, or if you just want to download the PDF, you can click here. Now, if there are changes, if there are major changes, let's say this business tax change happens with this new law, we would probably start from scratch and take down some of our business tax stuff, honestly. But if every year there's law changes, and if we need to update a webinar with information that's pertinent to new laws, we'll just do it on the PDF. We will not re-record the whole webinar. I think last year, this is a good example, certified green energy. Yeah, so good example here. There were some laws that passed last year, so we updated the PDF with the new laws. So just that there for you. Am I missing anything else? I'm going to go ahead and turn on the chat so we can get in. We have a couple minutes for a few more questions. Mitch, Lance, is there anything else you want me to show them on? You know what? Hold on. I think I've got to get out of this to go back over to open up chat. I'll come back to it. But
That's fine. We can also show them how to navigate to that new business landing page that we had broken down at the very start.
yes. Okay, I opened up chat.
Show them.
Yeah. Okay. So chat is open. I can't see it, y'all, while I'm over here in showing the web page thing, so y'all can pull some stuff out of there, but let's go back over. We're on tn.gov/revenue, and going to show you for businesses, the tile towards the bottom of our main homepage here, for businesses, and then the tile for new businesses. This is kind of what we went through during the first hour of this webinar today, is all of this stuff here. And if you click here to download a printable worksheet to help you follow along with this guidance. So thanks for pointing that out, Mitch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, might be a good idea just to, no matter where you are in the process, to look through here and make sure you've hit all these marks here. So how's chat looking over there, guys? Anything we want to bring up in these last few minutes?
Yeah, we got a couple. Margaret had a question. She was asking about the mental health professionals, if they need to register for city county clerk for business license. Again, I would refer to, I would have to see, search to the SIC Major Group 80 and search to see if that specific profession is listed within that section of OSHA. If it is, then it's exempt from business tax. I know that there's some differences pertaining to how certain medical professions are licensed. That could potentially change things. And so I recommend you can probably do a Google search of SIC Major Group 80.
Yeah, I'm in here
Um,
right now looking to see. I think that Major Group
yeah,
80, a lot of the mental health uh, services are under, I think, health and allied, or stuff not elsewhere classified.
right.
But I would just say, yes, search under here. I know psychiatrists, just general counseling services, as far as I'm aware, are not part of Major Group 80. Again, we didn't make the laws. Do I kind of think they should be? Yeah, that doesn't matter. They're not. Just being a general licensed counselor is not. Psychotherapists, I believe, are. Hypnotherapy is listed. Psychologists, psychiatrists. But yeah, this just like Mitch said, I think a Google search for the SIC Major Group 80 would be good.
And I just I threw in the chat for Margaret the link to that OSHA website specific to Major Group 80. So
Perfect.
Dan Brown is asking how to confirm his payment schedule for paying sales and use tax from his customers. Simplest way from a customer standpoint, they would just need to look upon their certificate of registration. It's going to tell them their filing frequency, or you can log into TinTap and you can file that through the payment history. There's various places you can find that. Just click on their link there during the TinTap session. You'll go in, you'll find it there associated with the sales tax. Okay.
Yeah, the way it looks for a third party, it looks when they log into TinTap, it looks a little different than just your regular business owner because they're going to see all their clients listed. And I agree,
Mhm.
Lance. I think the best way is just to look up one by one each client and see. They'll see that action item though if there's an overdue one, but just to
Sure.
they wanted to make note. I can't think of an easier way than what you suggested. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left here.
there was one question from Carrie. When I called, our county said we did not need a business license. Our business is long-term rental properties. That is correct. Long-term rental, 180 days or more, that's not subject to business tax. And so you would not need a business license for long-term rentals.
That's right.
And then I think Rachel said the same question. Do
Mhm.
I need a business
Mhm.
license for residential rental house? It depends on if it's short term or long term. If it's long term, no. If it's short term, yes.
And I believe that's defined as 180 days or less of
Yes. For
consecutive
business tax,
rental
it is.
for
Mhm.
business tax.
Yep.
Okay.
For sales
Um,
tax, I believe it's 90 days.
90 days. Yes, sir.
okay. So that, well, you know, that would be kind of cool if those two things lined up, wouldn't
You
it? We
know,
don't make the
You would
yeah.
laws.
think.
We don't make the
Yeah.
laws. We just administer them. I'm going to point out a few resources we've got here in our final couple of minutes, final 1 minute. These are some resources that if you don't already know about them, wherever you are in your business journey, that are great. The Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development has a Smart Start Guide. Tennessee Small Business Development Center, great networking tool there. Same with SCORE and of course the SBA. So if you've got the PDF of this, those links you can get to from there. Follow us if you're on any of these social media platforms. We recommend following us. We will put reminders out of due dates coming up, that kind of thing. We put information out about educational resources that we have. If we're closed, please follow us. And I will land here for the final few seconds with our contact information if we didn't get around to your question, because again, we had several hundred people on here at any given time and there was no way to answer everything, but we do appreciate your questions and want to make sure they get to us. So send us an email or call Mitch's group over there at 615-253-0600. We'll get to you. We'll answer your question. We really prioritize customer service. I know it sounds like an oxymoron when it comes to government, but you will get good customer service. I think I can give you a guarantee of that. We may not like the answer always, but we will help you. Mitch and Lance, thank y'all so much for joining us today. Anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, go ahead, Lance. I'm good.
No, just appreciate the opportunity to sit in. Do want to tell our taxpayers we appreciate them and all they do, and
Yes.
just don't hesitate to reach out to us. And you've been hit with a huge amount of information. Please take some time to soak this up, rewatch, revisit, and just as Katie has mentioned so many times, reach out to us. We'll help you.
That's right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. It was a long morning, lots of information. Thanks for sticking with us, and hopefully we'll see you for one of our upcoming tax webinars. Go register for this month's the tax compliance and collections process. We'll see you soon.
See ya.
Good day, guys. Bye.